What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I am the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, here to talk about the changes coming into patch 13.20. And it's a doozy. This is a really big patch. If you want more context on why we did what we did, I have two other videos out. One is the PBE preview, and one is the patch preview with more locked changes. Here to talk about, why we're doing what we did. A lot of the why is in those videos, but here in the rundown, we'll do a brief overview of why we did things, but primarily it's going to be diving into the numbers themselves as they are locked. They are going live. By the time you are watching this video, it's probably already live on your server. The preamble that always must go without saying, but I will bring it up regardless, is that we will not get everything perfectly right. If we need to retune things, we obviously will. A big thing to keep in mind is, here is an adage I will provide you, which is that champions need to be tuned downstream of systemic effects. What that means is, for example, let's say it is correct at the current shape of jungle for junglers to have less generic sustain in the jungle. If this means that some champions now have way too low health of clears, we can then tune those champions to have better clears to feel good, and other champions maybe, made off like a bandit, and now they're just too strong. We have to tune them down because now that they no longer have one of their core weaknesses, they now look a lot better. I expect there to be substantial follow-up work here because there are very large systemic effects here that I think in the short term, on this patch, we should not be preemptively accounting for, unless it's really obvious exactly what's going to happen, and instead say, look, there are going to be some balance outliers in this patch. There's going to be someone who made off like a bandit and completely crushes this patch. There's going to be someone who is going to lose 3% win rate and look horrible. And we will tune those champions back up. We will immediately make changes. If we have to micropatch, we will, though I doubt we will. But we'll meet on Monday. After getting a bunch of patch data in, I'm sure we're going to slam in like 20 champions who want, to have, quick buffs, quick nerfs. But yes, there are going to be balance outliers. If you are really good at identifying what's going to be good via the patch, congratulations, you get 2 weeks of being smarter than everyone else and making the new meta before everyone else does. This is just the case with large systemic changes, okay? And let's talk about what's going on in the patch itself. There are a few champion changes. We'll get to them when it comes down to it, but the big thing is that there is a big sweeping set of changes to the jungle, a big sweeping set of changes to snowballing in the game, and a set of big sweeping changes to Cassante. Alrighty, let's get into the game. Jack's visual update looks pretty cool. He's pretty sweet. Alright, great. I didn't help with that one. First up, we are nerfing Akshan. Now, there are some champion changes this patch. We tried to go a little bit later here because we knew there were going to be some pretty big systemic knock-on effects. And it could be that Akshan, currently being an early game champion, if winning early game doesn't mean anything anymore, and Akshan is now a garbage champion, we will buff him right back up and put him back where he needs to be. But ultimately, this is a champion who would already be doing very well in both mid and top lane in all remotely high elos. And when we made changes to him a couple patches ago, which was to give him a little bit more late game durability to try to lower his late game damage, this ended up being an overall buff for the champion, so now he's just ultimately too strong. So the goal here was to nerf him somewhat. We are not trying to flatten out his win rate with game time. He probably should be more of an early game champion. That said, these nerfs do affect early game a little bit, but it's a little bit flatter than it could be. Pretty much all the nerfs kind of settle out by mid game. We're certainly not buffing his late game by any means, but early move speed down on Avengering, and a 5 flat damage per shot on Heroic Swing. Flashbang warning. Alrighty, so by the way, for the rest of this video, unless I state otherwise, here is the example bonus AP and bonus AD we're using for any given champion. This is basically them trending toward 5 items, not using things like Death Cap or Veigar passive, but essentially saying, hey, here is a Doran's Ring into adaptive shards, here is a Doran's Blade into adaptive shards, and then prorating basically per level. These are the numbers. They're not going to be perfectly accurate to what you're going to have in any given game of League of Legends, but close enough that I feel like this is replicable, and it'll get you directionally what is actually changing with these champions. Okay, so with Akshan, here is the amount of damage coming out of his E. It is, of course, worse early than late with the 5 flat damage off, but ultimately here's how much damage he's losing as a flat amount, as a percentage amount, and then here's how much move speed he's losing off of his Q. Keep in mind that the Q is a decaying move speed, and it refreshes when he hits either half of that Q, so it'll bump back up to 20% or 40% or whatever as it is. Regardless, here are the numbers. This certainly will be a nerf. It is more early game than late game, although we do intend this champion to still retain an early game skew. The champion simply is too good in higher elos, and so a simple nerf. Next is a fairly large reshape to Bel'Veth. The goal here is to nerf her, especially her non-crit, non-on-hit builds. Right now, she's doing a lot of sort of bruisery stuff where it's Stride Breaker as the primary damage item, and ultimately trying to say, hey, you should rely more on buying attack speed or getting stacks. You should rely more on hit effects in crit and whatnot. So Kraken Slayer is good and everything else like that. And so first up, the bonus attack speed is down pretty substantially. Now this is not just down 5 to 10%. This is down a lot in the middle here because now it's scaling according to the stat progression multiplier. We'll talk about that when we go into the numbers themselves, but this is actually it's a pretty big deal. This is not ignorable. So this is actually a much bigger change than it probably looks like on paper. It's actually worse than 5 to 10% less attack speed. Next up, the E damage reduction now scales on rank, so it's going to block much less damage in the early game. And then the damage output of E itself is going down by 2 to 6. Keep in mind the AD ratio is coming back up by 2%, as is the on-hit damage conversion. Which really means that it takes between 100 and 300 total AD, but keep in mind this is like effective AD, so on hit effects come through, and now crit chance is a real thing, so all of those things will multiply or add to the AD, which makes this a much softer nerf than it looks like if you're buying things like Kraken Slayer or Rage Blade or anything with crit on it. So moving her towards a squishier build and away from going Bruiser. And then finally, less health on her Remora at ranks 1 and 2. And less out-of-combat move speed on her ultimate at ranks 1 and 2. So let's talk about what's going on with this champion overall. So here is the amount of actual bonus attack speed granted via the passive. As I told you, it's more than just minus 5 to 10%. You can see in the middle, it's actually worse. It's 24% less coming out of the passive. So the total throughput here is weaker. This, of course, includes just, Q autoing Raptors at the start of the game. Overall, this is a nerf, of course. Here is a rough approximation of how much attack speed she might gain via her passive and itemization. So this is assuming she's going to get 160% bonus attack speed from various sources, from items and stacks. Is this the appropriate number? I'm making it up, but this is saying, hey, if we interpolate going to about 160% bonus stats by the end, because the base 100% is I'm level 1, I have 100% base attack speed. This is the actual throughput here in terms of attack speed. Again, assuming this is a decent approximation, then this is the numbers. An easy rule of thumb is doing 1% less damage is roughly 0.5% win rate. Now the champion does more than simply auto attack, so this is not going to be completely stringent here, but this in and of itself, even with a pretty solid amount of bonus attack speed purchased, is a pretty meaningful DPS drop, so this will affect her if she can't get it back in other places. Of course, she's getting it back via her E critting and her E having a solid AD ratio and on hit damage. Okay, so what's next? Here is the damage reduction for Bel'Veth E. I want to point out a quick thing around talking about damage reduction. If you are not dying during the damage reduction, you should actually compare DR linearly, in that, every 70 damage I block is now 42 damage I block, which is only 60% as good of an ability. If you would die full to dead, this would instead be something very different, where instead of taking 3 damage, you take 6 damage, and you thus live twice as long. This would be a bigger nerf if you were dying through this entire situation. That's generally not going to be the case here, so want to point out that kind of scaling it linearly is actually more appropriate. Anyway, the next thing is the damage per hit. This is, again, using the example build we talked about of getting up to 250 bonus attack damage, plus her base stats, her attack damage, everything else. Keep in mind that if she gets stacks of Conquer, which is her best keystone, if she gets, again, things like Kraken Slayer, which is a very common item for her. Kraken Slayer has on hit damage. On hit damage is functionally base AD here. If she gets crit chance, which Kraken Slayer has, that's functionally bonus AD there as well. So if you're doing a Stride Breaker style build, this is roughly what your damage looks like. If you're doing a Kraken Slayer style build, it is in the green. One thing I am not mathing out here, by the way, but certainly is relevant, is her R has passive on hit damage. That will also get the 8% benefit here. So do be clear that in any realistic build, she's actually getting more damage out of her E, especially the live builds that are doing Kraken Slayer more often than not. So she is doing more damage. She's blocking less damage. She does have less attack speed, though. That is also, of course, quite relevant. Final thing is how much health her minions have when she summons them, and how much total out of combat move speed she has herself. This is before boots, so the real numbers are a little bit, yes, it's still minus 15, minus 5, but percentage-wise, that percentage is smaller when she has plus 25, plus 45, plus whatever extra move speed via those mechanics. Regardless, though, her Remora have a lot less health, especially in the early game. She has less out of combat move speed to get around the map, especially in the early game. So just, hey, by the way, These are the interactions with Bel'Veth. She's probably going to do more damage with her E, but everything else is strictly weaker. That are the changes. Those are the changes to Bel'Veth. Next is a set of changes to Galio here. And if I wasn't clear, right, the goal is to get Bel'Veth to go into squishier, crit or on-hit style builds, right? Make that the incentive. Make her more of a late-game scaler where if she can get the gold, she's awesome, instead of being kind of a snowballer where she's actually pretty decent early game, has actually pretty solid gank paths, right? Has several dashes, has a knock-up, has good follow-up. You can't trade her back because the DR is just like, she actually has a really complete kit at like level 3 or 4, and so it's just saying, hey, you're going to have to pay this off a little bit later with more items, with more damage, with something else, but it's not going to be quite as early game, and so pushing her towards the late game skew, and pushing her away from bruiser builds by making her rely more on things like on-hit damage scaling and critting. Okay, let's move forward. So Galio is getting some changes. Some context here is we do not want Galio to suddenly start winning all the mage lanes. We think it's appropriate if Galio has say in some of his lanes, of course, but not trying to push him as an overall like lane bully style champion. Keep in mind, Galio's already pretty natively good into melee champions. His passive, his W, which hit confirms his E auto Q, or EQ auto is probably the actual pattern here. He's natively good into melee champions already, and if he's also built to be really good into mages, Galio stops having bad matchups. It's like exactly Tristana, Jace, and nothing else. And so even though Galio is going to be sort of in lore and across game time anti-magic, he's got some MR ratios. When he ults, he gives his teammates magic damage shield. He is good at reacting to the Katarina roam to bot lane or the Ahri roam to bot lane by giving his teammate a magic damage shield is going to block the Ahri assassination. That's still true. He doesn't have to win lane against the mages to fulfill that. He can lose prio and react to the roams instead of having prio and proactively diving. That combination is what has tended to make him really locked in pro jail. And so saying, well, we can unlock him from pro jail by saying, yes, you're meant to lose priority even against mages that you're going to beat in team fights, but you're not going to beat them in lane. They're going to beat you around the map. That is, he needs a weakness somewhere, especially when you have pro play being so mage heavy, and this is kind of the shot call we're making here. We know these changes are going to actually pretty substantially buff Galio support. Galio support maxes W first, and the W rank up has been increased, so congratulations. Galio support gets more power here than Galio mid, but also saying, look, once you are into the mid game, your passive shield timer, it's still, I think, longer than Malphite in many cases here. But it is an out-of-combat timer, so this is not refresh in the middle of combat, so you still have to finish taking damage, have Leandry stop ticking, and then, hey, it's going to start, start at the cooldown, so the actual throughput here is not actually, 33% more shields or whatever. Still, though, certainly a meaningful change, so here are the numbers. Galio's W cooldown, again, if you're maxing it, second is going to take a little bit longer. We can put the decimals in for funsies because why not? But yeah, basically, hey, from level 8 onwards, your cooldown is better. Congratulations. From level 6 onwards, your passive cooldown is better here as well. Yes, it's a very big spike from 10 to 11. As far as I know, it's intended by the designer. To say, yep, okay, you solidly got into mid game. Now go have a short passive shield, right? It's like, hey, we're not really giving you much for the laning phase. We're intending to not let you just trade your shield for lane prio on the laning phase. But okay, you've made it to the mid game. We're clearly past what is probably close to 2. Go ahead, it's yours. And I think that's a pretty reasonable spot to give Galio that buff. So this makes sense. This hits goals. These are just sort of, hey, here's why we're doing what we're doing. So next is a set of changes to Jinx. We know Jinx has been in pro jail before. We really, really don't want Jinx to be in pro jail. This champion has been a 53% win rate bot laner before without people throwing out bans at her. She's actually been, honestly, one of the fairer AD carries to be powerful. And generally speaking, I am a big supporter of champions like Jinx having the win rate in bot lane, right? Win rate has to be zero sum, so this means win rate has to be somewhere. And I don't believe League of Legends is the best game when every champion measures exactly 50% win rate, because there's way too many factors there. That win rate can't even just be a direct measure of power. Now, of course, as players, we can look at public data sites and say, I see a win rate. This champion is successful, and that's true. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're overpowered or underpowered. There's a lot of reasons why they could be. It could be they're good against a certain meta pick. This is like Malphite is good into Jax and Jace, and they're really popular champions. Or this could be we're in a tank meta right now, and these champions are really good with or against tanks. Any of these things can be true, right? Regardless, I think Jinx is a very fair AD carry in that when you dive her, the dive completes and she dies. That's pretty healthy overall, and if Jinx is just very strong, but it's not always in her hands because she doesn't have Kaisa E, she doesn't have Kaisa R, she doesn't have Zaya R, she doesn't have Sivir E, she doesn't have, all the very strong disengage safety tools. Okay, well, Jinx can win a lot of games, but in the back of your mind, you can always one-shot her because she can't get away from a Camille. She has no tools aside from getting the chompers preemptively. That's her one tool from dropping a Camille, right? But when you look at pro play, well, their Milios and Rakans and everything are going to do a really, really good job of zoning for her and peeling for her and lining up for her. And it's like, well, this champion is no longer fair because really good teams, coordinated teams, of course, don't let her weaknesses show. And so taking these champions who are sort of, in a way, low agency, they can't self-peel, taking AD carries who can't self-peel and saying these champions should be good in solo queue and bad in pro because pros will already peel for them, and finding ways to achieve that, I think is probably a good idea and direction that we should try to do. It's like, that to me makes sense in terms of skewing champions around and whatnot, and making the roster fair for kind of everybody involved. So the hope here is actually, and I really do believe this, that like Jinx can be a 52% win rate AD carry and be like completely fair. So that thought process I want to bring up. Let's talk about the changes themselves. So a very simple one is just, hey, we know this is win rate. It's probably going to be under 1% of win rate, but it's still going to be pretty cool. Great, just a little bit more durable. That's nothing else to say really here. Next thing is get excited will now stack. This is going to be a rare thing where you like convert your first kill into a second kill, and then now you got the second kill. Will you do something with that second kill? Sometimes, maybe, yes, you might get a third, you might get a fourth, you might go on and do more. Absolutely, right? But it's after the second kill is when this is even a buff itself. So if you get two takedowns close together and then there's something useful for you to do with that power, great. You've got that for this little bit of window of time. This helps her be more exciting and do really cool things. No pun intended, though still there. Regardless, I think these are good changes. I'm a really, really big fan of excitement changes. I keep doing it. That aren't actually a lot of power. This is my favorite kind of change because it doesn't actually impact how much you win that much, but it does give Jinx players that 1 in 10 sick pop-offs. That is exactly why League of Legends is fun. The individual snowballing where you get to be the all-star, that 1 in 15 games, like that is pretty much the reason people play League. I'm oversimplifying, but like this kind of thing, very big deal. Okay. Either way, the rest of the buffs here are to overall baseline reliability. So 5-second decrease off of R's cooldown, damage increase by 25 and 0.15% bonus AD. Minimum damage is 1/10. Regardless, this is of course a very, very large damaging spell. Jinx R, right? There's no utility. This thing has to do a lot of damage to be worth it. The only thing it does is damage, and hey, this damage is going higher and higher and higher. So here's Jinx's base health before and after. This is, by the way, including a Doran's Blade as an expected purchase. So here's how much health a Jinx really has. Keep in mind, level 18 Jinx doesn't really exist. You don't get that far into the game in most cases, but here is the data table on how much health she has. And then here is expected R damage. Again, I showed you how much AD we expect her to get, plus 250 around level 18. And yeah, this is kind of the world that roughly that Jinx is going to live in, and how much damage this R is going to do. And yeah, it's going to be quite a bit, right? This is a very impactful, very high damage spell. If she can land it, she's going to do a lot of physical damage. Worth noting, right? Champions almost always have at least 100 armor at level 18. So you see 1,000 damage here. You're like, wow, it's a lot. But it's like, this thing does 500 damage unless she gets some kind of armor pen. Now, still 500 damage to your health bar. That's still 1/4 of someone's health, not counting the missing health stuff, not counting an LDR. This is a very strong ability, don't get me wrong, but like, Cannon R always does more damage than this, right? And it's arguably easier to use. This is still good, don't get me wrong, just these are the numbers. Alrighty, move on to the next one, and there is a very, very large set of changes to Cassante. I talked pretty well at length around the reasons why these changes are happening. The TLDR is sort of here. Basically, Cassante is fundamentally unfair when highly mastered. He has a lot of very tight combos that interlink from one another to where he can just cycle his entire kit against you and you're stunned the entire time. And that would be okay, except for the fact that the opening to these combos are instantaneous. Tap W has no time for reaction, and you can even cast it far away because you can E-tap W, or you can Q3 flash. And again, if he just throws out Q3, you're like, is he flashing or not? Because if he is flashing, you're dead if that connects. You're dead if you don't preemptively flash a spell shoot or something else to dodge out of the way. And so Cassante holds all the cards because you can't really poke him out. And every time he opens up this opportunity, he has the chance of just simply one-shotting you. And specifically, the ability for him to become a burst assassin while building full tank is problematic. And so opening up the windows to say, look, if you're a good player, you can see it coming, you can counter, you can dodge, you can get ready, you can do something, you can peel, you can who knows what, and say, okay, on the receiving end of K'Sante combos, it is going to be much, much more fair. He is going to be less of a burst mage, less of an assassin. And on the K'Sante side, it's, hey, we're going to slow you down, but your abilities are going to be more reliable. They're going to be stronger. You're going to have better outputs. You're going to have more reliable outputs. And the hope here is that he is more fair to play against, but also a lot stronger in the hands of 99% of players. Currently, the only Elo where K'Sante has a 50% win rate or higher is exactly Challenger. And then obviously in pro play, he's like the number 4-ish like pro top laner, 4 or 5 for most of Summer Split at this point. Ever since the shield nerfs, he's been around there. So like he's been a pretty good pro top laner. He's been an okay challenger top laner, and for everyone else, he has been, I don't want to call him weak. He's been underperforming the required mastery on him and everything else. Regardless, again, the goal is to allow us to make him more approachable and stronger and have his mastery curve and his resulting power, his observed power, look more like something like Yasuo or Yone, where like this champion has a mastery curve. It takes some time to learn him. Like there's a lot of depth to him, but also like even in silver, Yasuo has like a 48% win rate. K'Sante is like 44 in silver. And like that's very, very far apart. So let's try to bridge these things. Let's bring up his bottom end. Let's bring down his top end. Let's make him more fair. Let's talk about the changes themselves. First things first, very, very simple base stat change to say, hey, you have less base health, but you have more health growth and more armor growth. Let's talk about those numbers in isolation. And by the way, when we're doing calculations on his builds, here is the amount of bonus HP and bonus armor MR I'm going to assume for the champion. This is double armor shards. This is scaling to a pretty full build. This is going to be relatively accurate towards what a completely full build K'Sante would have. I might be slightly overestimating how much he's really gaining. For example, this is basically Sunfire Cape plus Steel Caps and conditioning turning on. That's probably a little bit aggressive here, but still, this is going to be relatively accurately what his build is kind of going to look like. It's not that far from reality. I'm not going to super duper fine tune it. Basically just says, here's what you have at level 1. Here's what you have at level 18. Let's interpolate between, and it's going to be relatively accurate. Things like grasp stacks can make up the difference in the middle and whatnot. Let's just kind of move on. But here are the numbers, by the way. Okay, so here is his base health. And his base armor before and after the changes. Obviously, in the real world, again, he builds things like Doran Shield and buys full items, but just as a base stat profile, yep, it breaks even at level 8, and then he's just baseline tankier. This is multiplying against the armor. Of course, his armor is strictly higher than before. These numbers are always higher on the right after level 2. So you multiply that up against the health, and you can see here's his magic durability, here's his physical durability, and you can see, yeah, 67% tankier as a baseline champion in the late game. Cool. Okay, great. K'Sante has, moderately high for a tank stats. Nothing extremely absurd, but yeah, his stats are now kind of high. Okay, cool. That seems reasonable. All right, first change. This is, of course, a strict nerf. The amount of bonus damage he gets from his passive via All Out. Keep in mind, he converts his passive into true damage. He gets a bunch of bonus damage, and yeah, instead of doing 35% and more, and then also convert it to true, it's just 35%. And converting it into true. So what is the total damage of the passive before and after? Goes from 146% to 207% back in the old version at a full build. Now it's just 135% of the old damage. And so yes, the passive damage is down, eventually 10, eventually 20, eventually 30%. So the passive in All Out is doing less damage. Next change is that Q's base damage is getting decreased by 20 to 0. Keep in mind there is a bonus resist ratio as well as a total AD ratio. So the actual damage looks like this. It's still a 60 damage ability at rank 1. This is roughly as low as you're allowed to make abilities realistically in League of Legends. The button press has to actually be good and feel good and do enough. 60 is pretty much the bar. Just trying to find ways to open up his early game to be a little bit more punishable since his Q is so inexpensive. He basically never runs out of mana pressing Q. Okay, well, it's going to be less good as a poking tool, less good as a spacing tool. you can use it to last hit, but now at level 1 and 2, it's actually worse than your base AD when doing so. But hey, for a spell that's really, really inexpensive, okay, you can still build up to Q3 and try to go for a combo or something, but hey, it's going to be, less strong as a poke tool since it doesn't really have a real mana cost. Okay, there's those changes. Next big thing, again, you cannot flash while winding up Q3. There is actually going to be a bug in this patch where you will occasionally be able to flash during Q3. It's going to be pretty rare, but it is technically going to be possible once in a while. It's actually not something you can control. It's going to be random whether or not you can actually do it. Once you lower your Q cast time by getting some bonus stats, that will no longer be possible anymore. Basically, it's just the way it was implemented was there were small mistakes in it. I discovered it after we locked the patch. It'll be fixed for 0.21. But hey, just by the way, once in a while it will be possible. I'm just letting you know this bug actually exists. But again, it's going to be relatively rare. One thing I did add, though, is that you can now hold shift and look at your tooltips and see how much bonus resist you still need to finish progressing armor MR for cooldown, and how much bonus HP you need to finish progressing cast time. So if you get like 2 items in, you're like, oh, actually, conditioning popped, we got a mountain drake, and actually my cooldown's good. What I need is some health to get the cast time down. Only buy some bonus health. And when I look at, by the way, when I look at Kasante's current builds on live, when I look at what people tend to build on him, they are often heavily under-investing in bonus health, and bonus health is the biggest feels change where it like really, really, really ramps his cast time. You can get half the cast time with enough bonus health, and I think people kind of neglect that stat right now. And so just by having the ability to check these stats, I really recommend you try to do this. I think you'll find yourself being like, oh, I can switch my build around, and he will feel more fun when you realize that you need to build a lot more health than you currently are building. Cool. Okay. So the next thing is a big set of changes to Pathmaker. So very minor one, the mana cost is down 15. This ability is meant to be able to be cast more reactively. It's meant to be able to be tossed out a little bit speculatively. So it's just going to be cheaper overall. Next change, this is of course probably the biggest change of the entire change list, so that Pathmaker now has a minimum channel time of 0.65. Now it's worth noting though that you are always going to get the maximum charge value out of the spell. Max charge used to be 0.85, so you're getting max charge sooner by about 1/4, but you also can't tap cast anymore, so you're always getting full value. You can still channel for the full second if you want the DR for longer, or you want to wait and like immune a stun or a knockup or something, or who knows what, or you've been stunned anyway, you might as well just have the DR during it, or any other reason why you're playing bind games, who knows what, you're waiting on spell shield, bunch of reasons you could be doing this. Regardless though, you get the max value sooner, but you do have to wait that long. Okay, so what's happening afterwards now that you are getting always the max value and a little bit sooner that you are required to channel it? Okay, well first, the damage reduction is changing from a flat amount that scales with bonus resists to a flat amount that scales simply with character level. The stun duration no longer has the minimum here. It has a maximum, which is now brought up to the max rank value. So you are getting a 0.4 second stun increase in the early game. That's, of course, a pretty big deal. And again, you access it 0.2 seconds sooner. And the damage is being substantially, massively increased. The minimum damage, of course, goes away. The maximum damage is still heavily eclipsed by the new version of this ability, which has a flat damage, which has a total AD ratio, has bonus armor MR ratios, and has increased targets max health damage. So let's talk about his example targets here. So I am choosing Kasante with items versus Aatrox with items, assuming we're both going from Doran's Shield to full build at level 18. How much damage does a spell deal? Well, the old minimum damage was always basically nothing. Even at level 18, doing 3% of Aatrox's max health was not a lot of damage. And yeah, it was just always pretty bad. It never really mattered. This damage was always kind of fake here. And of course, comparing it to the new maximum damage, of course, the numbers are substantially higher. No duh, right? You lose the access to tap W, but hey, you get this. Okay, well, what about max W, right? Well, max W, again, will reiterate that instead of taking 0.85 seconds, takes 0.65 seconds, but also deals roughly double the damage it used to here. Full channel W is now basically a real spell that does real spell levels of damage. It's worth noting that, by the way, it was basically always a trap to keep channeling W. By waiting 0.8 seconds, you gained 50 damage. And that's 50 tooltip damage, which means like you could have just simply auto-attacked instead or cast Q instead, and either one of those would have dealt more damage. This is against someone, by the way, who does have a substantial amount of health. At level 10, we've actually got multiple ranks in the ability, and all you got was 110 damage. That's not very good for waiting 0.8 seconds of doing literally nothing when you could have just simply been tap casting the ability. Essentially, the big problem here is channeling W was basically always a bait because it didn't block very much damage, it didn't deal very much more damage, it was kind of just always wrong to do so, and now it's much more likely to be correct to do so. This ability is going to be a lot stronger, and again, deals a real spell's level of damage. So yes, 75% to, in some cases, more than double the damage that it used to. This is, of course, a very, very large upgrade, a very substantial damage increase. Now, to be fair, this is against a champion that gets up to 4,000 something max health because it's an Aatrox, but keep in mind that only 400 of this damage is max health damage, and even against a level 18 Kai'Sa, you're only going to lose 200 damage here, so this is still 505 against a 0 bonus resists Kai'Sa, and if you compare what this was, well, this would have done half damage, right? This would have been 175 to 505, which is more than double, right? So in terms of K'Sante landing W on a squishy, this damage is massively increased. And in terms of landing W on a tankier target, it's still, in some cases, double the damage. So a pretty large increase here. Again, a required minimum channel of 0.65, but you access the max value stun, the max value damage, the max value dash distance, everything else, you access it sooner. And again, much more damage, much more stun. Damage reduction, we can talk about that here. I believe that is up next. Yeah, so here's the stun difference. Again, up until level 12, the stun is just strictly stronger, but then even then at level 13 onwards, you access the max stun earlier on by 0.2 seconds, though, again, requires the minimum channel. But here's the damage reduction, again, and it's worth noting that even though it does not scale off of how much gold you have acquired, the damage reduction is basically just always better. Again, one of the things I pointed out was that it felt like it was always a trap to channel W because this thing only blocks 30% of incoming damage, which means waiting 0.8 seconds just to deal 50 damage and only blocking like a third of the damage coming in made it always incorrect to channel W. It was a trap. Part of learning K'Sante was, why are you channeling W? This spell is garbage. And now it's like, okay, well, let's give it a reliable level of DR where that extra 1/3 second you can choose to use it because the amount of damage it blocks is enough where you actually might make the choice to block this damage because it's like the number is high enough early in the game that this matters. And then second to that, just simply the fact that the output is quite good, everything else. But yes, up until very, very late into the game when we're several items in, looking at 3 to 4 items, then the DR is slightly lower. But also, if you're 3 to 4 item K'Sante, you're so tanky, you don't really need that much more DR. Like, how much damage are you really blocking in this case anyway? So in this case, it certainly matters when you're in a trading pattern against Jax or something and you're trying to immune like the Leap Strike Stun combo. You can actually block 43% of the Leap Strike Stun combo. That's pretty meaningful. You're blocking 50% more damage than it was blocking before, right? If this was a shield, it was like, hey, I'm going to provide you a 80-point shield. It's now a 120-point shield, right? That is a very big deal. It's a substantial increase in what it's actually blocking here. Again, a little bit weaker late game, but also he's very tanky, and keep in mind that he even has the bonus health and armor and stuff from before. So even in some of these cases, it still makes up for it. Okay. So next set of changes is to Pathmaker All-Out version. So one of the things that we tried to get rid of here with these changes was to make him less of a burst mage. And so you'll see changes later on with the R, you see it with the passive up there, but also with all-out version of Pathmaker. So all-out Pathmaker used to give him a substantial damage increase. Like, this damage is always kind of fake. This gave him, it was, I think, 110 to 310 base damage, plus 50% total AD, and with how much bonus AD he prints from his ulti, that ended up being another, like, 80 or so base damage. So, like, a level 13 Pathmaker would add something like 370 damage to the ability. Which made it like, oh, now it's a really, really heavy spell. It's finally, like, a burst spell, kind of. And so what I'm doing here is saying, well, it's actually going to be much worse. So this is R plus W max damage. Now, I'm still using, Aatrox as the primary example here, and I'm relatively approximating the amount of bonus AD he has. It's not perfect here, but considering the AD ratios in these spells are identical, any differences here are going to be differences like, if I'm like up 30 damage here, they're both up exactly 30 damage. So the percentages might be slightly off in the real world, but the like flat damage differences are exact here essentially. And so the amount of damage coming out of this, and keep in mind, when you cast All Out, it resets W's cooldown. So the like, R through a wall, auto Q, auto, 0.4 second channel on W, that instead of requiring by the way, so the other change, right, is instead of requiring 0.4 seconds to get max damage, there is a 0.5 second minimum channel time. So once again, delaying the spell a bit, giving you room to react, but not letting players screw up and get the wrong version of the spell where they're missing like all of the damage output. But you always get max value, you just get it a little bit later the max. So in this case, right, like old W, you get the max value sooner. In this version, you get max value later. It is still faster in all out form, but you are getting it later. And you're also getting less damage. So again, the R resets the W cooldown. So now R to W is doing still a lot of damage, just less than before. It is no longer a 700 damage nuke that comes out after landing a full stun combo on somebody. So his ability to one shot goes down unless he can land his intentional W, but the W is meant to be a lot more fair by having a minimum channel and allowing you to react to it. The damage reduction is getting changed from just 10% higher than these numbers. It just becomes. I'm not griefing, right? It's, where is it? Yeah, 50 to 75 instead of 30 plus 12% per stuff. And so, right, here's your new numbers instead of your old numbers. Yes, again, a little bit later on in the game. And to be fair, right, in All Out, it does delete a lot of your armor MR. So, hey, you are going to be a little bit squishier when channeling W really late into the game. But hey, it's still a 75% DR at rank 3 ulti. That's still very, very good. That's still a lot of damage blocked. Yes, you're blocking less damage than before, but honestly, this doesn't need to be that extreme of a damage blocker, so I think this is still reasonable. I think this is still a totally reasonable number here, and yes, W is still a very valuable parry. It is very good for this tool, right, for this purpose. So burst damage down, but worth noting, the cooldown is down, right? The cooldown is lower on Pathmaker, so you can actually cast it more often, even if individual casts deal less damage. And again, the reliability of it as a parry goes up, its value as a parry goes up, its value as a burst tool goes down. So real quick, the rest of the numbers here, right? The mana cost went down a little bit. It went down by 15. So here's the comparison before. So we can throw out W's more often in lane, use it as a respectable parry. It's damage respectable. Its damage block is respectable. And then here is the all-out cooldown difference. Yes, the damage is down per cast by about 1/4. And the cooldown is down by about 1/4 as well. So you are more likely to get 2 or maybe even 3 casts of Pathmaker during all-out. The goal with All Out is to make him more of a skirmisher. So instead of All Out turning him into a burst mage where he gets a 0.4 second 800 damage W, it's a bit faster than it used to be, right? It's 0.65 instead of 0.85, or sorry, 0.5 instead of 0.65. The damage goes a little bit higher because he gets bonus AD, but the entire point is that he's supposed to get faster. His Q has a lower cooldown, his Q has a faster cast time, his W has a faster cast time, his W just like literally travels faster. His R is now going to give him attack speed, so that when you're not spell weaving, you still just kind of R faster, just kind of in all ways. Even his E moves faster, by the way. Like, everything about Cassante is faster during All Out. He shreds his resists, he gets some more damage, but he's primarily faster, and that's kind of the thing here. And so he gets a cooldown incentive on W, just like he gets a cooldown incentive on Q, and that is kind of the change here. Okay, now, All Out itself is being made less punishing. Basically, there is slightly less timing constraint on I have to wait until I'm below half HP to cast this one. And now if you just cast it because you're just kind of hitting buttons, like the absolute like low skill floor is going up a little bit because you grieve yourself a little bit less by not having to worry about this, right? So you're shredding less of your health if you're casting it suboptimally. We're raising the floor a little bit. Of course, it's still correct to wait until your health threshold gets low enough that you're not deleting health off yourself, but still, that is the case here. A small nerf to his knockback distance. Basically, one of the primary things that Cassante could do, especially in coordinated team play, was take a flank TP and hitting a wall or not just says, I'm going to cast this button just to shove the AD carry toward my team like a point and click Lee Sin R. I mean, Lee Sin R is point and click, but just play him as Lee Sin. Here you go. I've carried Kai'Sa towards you. Just making that slightly less powerful ultimately. That's really the primary goal there. It's also a little bit less gank avoidance, right? If you're like, I got ganked by the Jarvan, and so I like R him just towards my turret just to cover distance. You're gonna cover less distance, right? It's going to be less of an escape tool, less of a basic insec, and just more about like, yeah, you've got to get them near the wall. You've got to go line them up. That's on you. You need to go place them there, go figure it out, go make it happen. And then if you do, you're rewarded. Congratulations. Next thing though is again making sort of like the snap casts a little bit less bad. So the damage here was basically trash. It just basically didn't exist. So now it's still pretty low, intentionally so, but just less complete garbage. Worth noting that R2 never actually had the AD ratio. It was actually hooked up wrong the entire time. The tooltip was hooked up to the calculation that had an AD ratio. Under the hood, the spell itself was never hooked up to that, so it never had an AD ratio, though it said so in the tooltip. This is just acknowledging that by acknowledging that there's no AD ratio in actual functional practice here, and just saying, look, R2, the benefit is you get some more damage, you stun them when they land, you get some kind of benefits here. Yes, it doubles the damage, congratulations, they're separated, like the value of separating them is that you separated them, congratulations, but you're not rewarded with a giant nuke. that resets into your, giant nuke from Pathmaker, right? So it's saying that successful wall slam is not just 1,000 and really more than that, right? Like W again at level 18 does over 800 damage. This was doing over 450. It turns out this champion just had 1,300 base damage. Not base damage. I mean, to be fair, he had to scale it some way, but it's like, these numbers were just simply too high, so lowering them overall, and we'll do the math on that real quick, so let's talk about it. So here is the R plus R, so this is R1, and this is if you land both halves. This is how much damage you would deal to a Kai'Sa. This is, the most played AD carry in League of Legends right now. She runs an armor shard, and she doesn't get any other resistance typically. Here is how much damage R1 would do. Again, it was fake. It's still pretty low, but here is her against her magic resist. And yeah, technically R1 does a bit more damage, but again, these numbers are so low, it doesn't really matter. Here's how much damage it did to her in the real world when you hit R2, and here it is afterwards. And so you can see, look, it's not huge, right? But like, hey, you are doing, 25 to 50 less damage to her actual health bar, combined with the W dealing, 90 to 100 less damage. And so, hey, we're taking 200, 250 damage or so, off of the burst combo of just R into W. That just that itself is going to do less damage, right? So the burst combo is going down a little bit when doing the wall kidnap. It's mostly cosmetic damage on R1, right? These damage numbers aren't meant to be very, very high, but hey, here are the numbers. Here's why it happened. Here's why the change is there. Make them less of a burst mage and more about if you separated them from the team. Congratulations. Your goal was to separate them. Your reward was you separated them. Congratulations. Now go play as a skirmisher. Go be a skirmisher. Go do your whole kit, right? Reshaping how much attack damage is gained. This is now saying, hey, look, a lot more of it scales on ulti rank, and less of it scales with gold. This is still a buff overall. We'll talk about that here. Here's how much bonus AD he gets before and after. So the transform, considering that it shreds your health bar, it shreds your armor MR, you still lose, most of your resists when you cast this button. Well, let's just ensure that the actual, high level output is good, is stronger. By end of the game, you are more than doubling your total AD, around level 10 or 11. It's not quite there, but in the early game, it's certainly not. But hey, the output of pressing this button and transforming and getting some stats, you're going to feel it more heavily since W no longer baseline increases the base damage, since the passive no longer baseline increases as you earn more and more and more and more gold. You get a bit more AD, but you'll feel in the Q, you'll feel in the W, you feel in your auto attacks, you get a little bit more there. Next change is actually going to be a buff, but the numbers look like a nerf. It's the healing ratio no longer scales on bonus health. It instead just scales on ulti rank, but instead of giving you the stat Omnivamp, which is 100% effective on single target effects, which is your basic attack, and 1/3 effective on AoE effects, which is your Q and your W, it is now just healing versus champions, irrespective of being AoE or not. And so if you're not hitting minions, here is the baseline value per, let's say, auto attack or per passive proc, but this is 3 times as good, right? Like if we take this and say, well, actually, here, we'll do it this way. We'll say, hey, by the way, here's what it was for your Q and your W, right? In the case of Q and W, your Omnivamp, your healing is more than doubled. In the case of your auto attacks, it's more like you lost 20%. So you tell me which one does more damage. I'll give you a hint. It's the W. But hey, by the way, he can use it more as a lifesteal thing, right? This guy is not buying Blade of the Ruin King. He's not buying these kinds of items. The entire point of all this is to say, yes, you are transitioning from a tank into a skirmisher. You are losing all this bonus armor MR. You are losing the max health that you had got from buying War Mugs or whatever else. You are getting attack damage. You're getting attack speed. You are getting lifesteal. You're getting faster spells. You're getting more mobile. You are turning into a skirmisher. And we're basically saying in more reliable ways, hey, we're going to give you attack speed. We're going to give you all the other speed tools. We're going to make your charges go faster. You're going to be faster. You're going to be squishier. You're going to rely on, high quality damage parrying. And maybe drain tanking afterwards, but we are transitioning you into a skirmisher, not into a burst mage, not into an assassin, into a skirmisher where you have to play your kit out and deal a lot of damage, and do a bit of repeating here, right? That is the point. That is the primary thrust of what's going on here. That is sort of the point, and that is why yes, he's getting attack speed to say no. Everything about your champion is getting faster during this, right? That is, you're getting all of this. Final point here is just say, hey, what is the auto attack DPS of this champion before and after the changes? And yeah, hey, this champion has 200 auto attack DPS now at level 14 or whatever. It's got 300 in a full build. Cool. This this is still not really that close to what a conventional marksman or someone like Master Yi has, but it says, look, you do have this to say, yes, go, you can be a skirmisher. And maybe like the number should be even higher. Like we just kind of copied Highlander and said, look, you get as much bonus XP as Highlander gives you. You just get Master ER with, you know, some of the other stuff gone, of course. And it could be like, nah, this should actually be like 30 to 90% bonus AS. And you're like, no, you're really, really fast. We're just going to peg it to what like a master you should have. But anyway, that is the rundown in the numbers of what is changing about K'Sante. Next topic. Kai'Sa is getting a small nerf here of 3 armor. Essentially, this is basically making the call that I don't think Kai'Sa is strictly overpowered. I really don't believe she is. If I put my foot down and said we're not allowed to nerf Kai'Sa as the like live pod lead, I could have said that, and I could have said no, we're not allowed to nerf her. I think this champion is fine. The call here is essentially that Kai'Sa is not necessarily overpowered, but has too flat of matchups, that she cannot be bullied for how mobile she can be, for how much she can carry late game, for how much she can easily follow up on her tank having a solid engage. Like Nautilus gives her 2 stacks, Leona gives her 2 stacks as well. It's like very easy to then just combine the rest of that combo with Halo Blades, and you've got a 5-stack plasma combo in about a second. And saying, hey, she is bullyable, right? She's going to be weaker to physical damage lane bullies, the Dravens, the Caitlyn's, Kalissas of the world, specifically going to be saying, hey, you're going to lose more of your AD carry matchups. Saying that as someone who scales quite well, as someone who has a lot of evasion, we're going to make your laning phase less safe, and so that's the change here. Milio's getting a pretty solid set of updates here. He got pro jailed sadly pretty early on in the year. He was also like very overpowered, to be clear, when he first came out. We didn't nerf him for a long time. We nerfed him once we saw pro play. Then pro was still playing him on the nerfed state. Maybe pro runs would have decayed, but we ultimately nerfed him out of pro play. And we've been trying to bring him back up since. And so we had some AP ratio changes earlier on. Here are some changes to make him just sort of a stronger default enchanter. So basically, the passive now counts as Milio's damage, so that he can buy things like Oblivion Orb. And, you know, of course, then Chemtech Putrefire, which is the same effect, basically. But it still grants the ally who applied the debuff the kill, so he doesn't kill steal, but just says, hey, you are good at applying Oblivion Orb. Otherwise, he had to literally either self-shield an auto or stand his own W with an auto, or he had to land the Q, which is hard, so you're allowed to buy Oblivion Orb, basically, which is a good change. I think that's wise. Next is Warm Hugs gets a 1-second cooldown and a 0 to 20 shield increase, and the Breath of Life gets a 20% AP ratio increase. And so we can talk about that here. Here's the Milio E cooldown before and after. Nothing too exciting here, but 1 second of the cooldown. Here is with an approximation of how much AP he should have, which is roughly around here for a default enchanter. He gets up to about a 10% stronger shield, which is totally solid, totally reasonable. And then with the same ability power, here's how much more healing comes out of the R. Yeah, cool changes, meant to be powerful. Go Milio. Next up, excluded changes to Morgana. Morgana is actually pretty weak everywhere, though she is still a very highly banned support. Of course, she's really sharp into a lot of tank matchups, and so it's trying to slightly alleviate that sharpness, but also bring up Morgana mid and Morgana jungle as viable. They're pretty weak right now. Morgana mid has been like a 52% win rate mid laner in years past, and just has fallen out, and it was like never a problem when she was a like observably strong mid laner. She's like pretty bad right now. So Morgana mid could gain a lot. Morgana jungle could get a pretty decent amount. And Morgana support, she probably could gain some power and hopefully lose some frustration. So what's going on is an AP ratio buff to the W, a monster mod increase to the W, Black Shield gets nerfed until you can max it out, and then Soul Shackles gets a bit more move speed in all directions now. Gets a stun increase at ranks 2 and 3, which is mostly accessed by mid and jungle, and a small damage plus AP ratio increase. And of course, it can hit twice, so it's going to be quite a lot of damage. Let's talk about the numbers here. So this is mid and jungle, so a fairly high amount of ability power. How much damage per tick does Morgana W deal? Well, since it's mostly an AP ratio buff, here is the damage change, and hey, a solid, 7, 10 something percent more damage. Pretty good. When you account for the monster mod as well, accounting for the fact that you're going to have less level 1 AP because no Doran's Ring, it's still a solid 10 to 20% more damage on W. So hey, that's actually pretty good. And keep in mind, this actually self-compounds because the lower health the camp gets, the more damage W deals. So a W, by dealing more damage per tick, will get the camp lower, which then further increases the damage per tick, and so it's actually going to be more than 10% more damage on the W in any given case here for Morgana. Great. Here is now support skewed stuff, which is what is the cooldown for the shield, right? 24 seconds becomes 26 seconds at rank 1, still 16 at max rank. And then again, 10% AP ratio, 25 damage on Soul Shackle. It's not going to bother tracking the stun because we know what that is at 11:16, 0.25, 0.5 seconds. But yep, the shield cooldown is worse until level 13, which most supports do not reach. So Black Shield is just basically strictly weaker for Morgana support. She does not care about the W AP ratio almost at all, but she does get quite a bit out of this R, gets to feel better about the damage, gets to feel better about moving faster, gets to feel better sometimes at 11 plus about the stun. So it is some light changes to Morgana support and pretty meaningful changes to Morgana mid and jungle. Next, our changes to Quinn. Quinn, much like with Akshan back in the day, got more power than we anticipated when we gave her some scaling durability. Ultimately said, look, okay, Quinn, first things first, you are a lane bully. We expect you to be a lane bully. We're not trying to really get rid of that niche for you. If you, like, basically, if she has such good out-of-combat move speed to roam around the map all the time, if she also wins all her late-game duels and also is a premier team fighter, there's champ has no weaknesses. So, we're not really trying to bring up her late game much. I don't think it's really allowed to go much further than it is going here in this patch. If she ends up being completely garbage because winning early game doesn't matter or these nerfs are too big, we can walk back some of these changes on Quinn and give her some power back. Like, completely reasonable here. Basically, these changes are meant to be consistent with other champions of her class, which is ranged top lane bullies. This puts her like functional health times armor physical durability right next to Teemo and Gnar. This move speed for a champion with a disengaged dash and extreme amounts of out-of-combat move speed through the R, having like default ranged champion or default marksman move speed, which is 330, seems more than reasonable for how much move speed she gets with R, move speed she gets with W, and how strong E is as a disengaged tool. I don't believe that she deserves to be faster than the average marksman with how good her anti-melee and roaming tools already are. And even in combat mobility to a certain degree, although W's cooldown is long enough that, the passive proc via W cooldown is long enough that that move speed, buff falls off pretty frequently. Still, though, my belief is this champion can comfortably sit at the default marksman move speed of 330, and that is more than reasonable. And basically this is just like saying, okay, look, I think these numbers are correct for the game to put her at the Gnar Teemo health bar and put her at the correct range champion move speed and say, well, this is more magnitude than I want to nerf Quinn by. Let's give her something back. And so what we're giving her back is some attack damage growth. I believe that to be good. I believe that's a reasonable lever for her to get. Anyway, let's talk about what's going on with Quinn. So here is Quinn's total health bar before and after. This is, we can see 603 becomes 703. This is, of course, with Doran's Blade as her example item. So her total health pool is more like this. With the... this is actually assuming she's running double stat shards, which is probably incorrect, actually. She probably has attack speed of one of the stat shards, so... I am slightly overcounting her AD overall, but assuming it's double attack damage stat shards and Doran's Blade, here's how much AD she has in a full build as she transitions towards a full set of items. Right, not a huge difference here in actual practice, but hey, 0.5% win rate versus extra attack damage is something. Again, take a look. If Quinn sucks next patch, we can happily buff her. Not a problem. I have nothing against Quinn. I'd actually love to do cool work on her. I remember I asked in the previous patch preview video what Quinn players wanted. It seems to me that the primary value that I'm getting from Quinn players is that they really like the flexibility. Like some people like playing only assassins, some people like playing only marksmen, but it seems like being flexibly able to play between the two is very important, which means I have no intent of like bricking one build or making the other better, but just saying, okay, let's kind of make sure your kit can function either side of it. You have some level spell casting, and so, that shape seems pretty appropriate right now, but again, something I'll keep an eye on. If Quinn sucks, again, more than happy to buff her back up to a level of power. Next thing is Zed. So Zed is one of the disproportionately most banned champions in League of Legends. So I did a dive into ban rates recently, and this was like a very simple analysis here. Is basically saying, okay, let's take a bunch of data. Let's take the 10 most played champions in each role, and compare their pick rates, their ban rates, their win rates, and then some deeper dives into like what their pick rate would be if they weren't banned ever, and then use that to say, okay, well, here's their would-be pick rate. Using that to then say, okay, that should go track back into ban rate. Identified that people ban AD carries less than other roles, so every other role has a disproportionately high ban rate relative to any champion's pick rate, and then basically tracking that back in and saying, okay, well, which champions are over banned for their would-be pick rate or for their power level. And it's basically, here's Zed, and then like every mid laner is like kind of normal. Like the only mid laner really with like a extreme ban presence is exactly Zed. He's like the only mid laner that just grabs bans. Shaco is this for jungle. Samira is this for AD carries. Otherwise, there's like no AD carry bans essentially anywhere. I forget what it is for other roles, but regardless, those are the ones that stood out as like really obvious. Anyway, so Zed has a really, really high outsized ban rate. Couple other things mentioning. Zed is actually late game skewed. Did you know Zed actually gains win rate with game time over the course of the average game of League of Legends? Also, W max second is actually his best build, not E max second. And so this doesn't like solve all of Zed's problems. He won't suddenly have no ban rate anymore. I mean, keep in mind the vast majority of Zeds don't rank up W past rank 1 until champion level 14, and thus, again, won't feel his nerf for a very, very long time, neither will their opponents. But we said, hey, W max second probably shouldn't be his best build. Also, Zed probably shouldn't be a great, shouldn't be a scaling assassin. That probably isn't correct. Like, if he's flat, that's probably okay. And so it's like, hey, we kind of hit all these goals at the same time with this change. Zed isn't strictly overpowered. We know he's kind of frustrating. That's not enough to say we must ban this champion. But it is saying, hey, there are some things that are kind of wrong that we think we should tune up. We should change around. And so that's what's happening here. So here is Zed's cooldown. Again, for most players, you will not feel this for a very, very long time. You finally feel it here. For those who are doing WMAX second, you'll feel it pretty early on by champion level 8. This is before your Mythic comes online, so relatively early on. I got my numbers wrong, didn't I? No, wait, hold on. Oh, I got my numbers really wrong. Wait, what am I doing here? Hold on. I clearly got something very silly here. I need to update my numbers. Oh, I know what I did. Yeah, this is 20.75. Okay, there we go. So it's this, and then... Yeah, there we go. That's what it's supposed to be, right? Yeah. 20 to 14 becomes 20 to 17. There we go. It's something like this. Okay. So, yes, a meaningful cooldown increase, right? I saw red and like, I must have done right. It's red. It's worse. Anyway, yeah, so the cooldown definitely meaningfully increased here, especially if you're maxing W second. 3-second increase in the cooldown, pretty big deal here. Right. Late game escapiness, even if you're only getting it, 15 or whatever, still going to be meaningful, still going to be felt. This does not suddenly make Zed have no ban rate. We know that. He's always going to have ban rate. That's just accepted. I'm pretty sure at a certain point. Regardless, it's fine. He's an assassin. He's a pretty cool guy. Let's move on. Ziggs gets an explosion radius increase. Sorry, not explosion radius. This is explosion hitbox. This is the Q has acquired a target on the bounce and decides I'm going to blow up because something is close enough to me, and so you are more likely to have the bomb say, I found a nearby target. Let me blow up and let me go deal my AOE damage around. Not much to say here. Cool. I want to call out that I believe this is going to be a mid lane skewed buff to Ziggs, because Ziggs in the bot lane often has someone who can CC you for him, and thus, they're Leona stunned. I'm of course going to land my Q. Not as land a hook, I'm of course going to land my Q. Blitzcrank, hooked in a knockup, I'm of course going to land my Q. Whereas Ziggs in mid is trying to hit Lux, who's dancing around, and it's like, well, she's less likely to dodge your bomb now. And so I think this is a mid lane skew buff, which is a good thing. Him requiring less setup seems like a pretty big positive. Great. All right, off on to system changes. Blighting Jewel is getting a cost decrease. Essentially, this item is just very bad as an individual component. It is getting better as an individual component. The total price of Void Staff is unchanged. Just, hey, stopping for Blighting Jewel is a little bit more reasonable. Not much to say here. The item is kind of bad. It's less bad. Dustblade of Drakthar. There's definitely... So basically, Dustblade is certainly overpowered, and it's absolutely overrepresented. There is a consideration that we should just I'm going to use Predator as the verb here. We're going for modern League of Legends, so we've Predator, which is we basically made it so bad that basically no one runs it, and intentionally so. It's got the occasional niche usage. Okay, congratulations, but realistically, that rune created some pretty bad gameplay. It made some pretty unavoidable ganks, made for some pretty unavoidable roams, and honestly, we actually think that League of Legends is a little bit better served if you play to your lane a bit more than currently, and so we're not in a rush to give really, really good roaming options right now, and so Predator is a little bit weak. There's the occasional champion you can use it. That's fine. It's meant to be occasional and not common. It could be that Duskblade is meant to be in the same boat, where it's meant to be occasional and not common. The problem is assassins don't have a lot of items right now. At least not a lot of mythics. Yomu's is totally fine. Eclipse is kind of a fighter item. Like, not a lot of assassins want to build a shield in their trading pattern, and so it's like, well, we could really, really push Eclipse toward Assassins, but then it would lose its fighters. And it's just like, well, we don't have a great, like, outside of reshaping several items, we're not willing to bring Duskblade into the dirt. So it's a nerf to Duskblade to hopefully get some of the poaching off of it. We've already made changes to champions like Aatrox and Vi. Not that Vi was building Duskblade, but like Aatrox has been. But like we know Collector is good, so Samira is optimally building Collector and not Duskblade. We know that Pyke is actually already optimally building Youmuu's. He should still optimally be building Youmuu's. Duskblade is wrong on him. Please don't do it. Please, Pyke players, just build Youmuu's. Your champion is cracked. Build Youmuu's. And hey, we're buffing Youmuu's, so maybe they'll really realize it. That'll be great. I'm looking forward to that. Regardless, hey, can we nerf Duskblade in a way that makes it a little bit less poached? And it still feels like it's kind of an assassin item. And so Blink Ability Haste, less of an assassin tool, though it still has the mythic passes, so it's got plenty of haste. And a little bit less damage amp. Again, this could have been 0 to 10%, 0 to 12%, some other number. But saying, hey, going for an intentionally fairly light nerf here to try to get people to move back to Gore Drinker, to Eclipse, to Stridebreaker, to whatever you're going to build, Triforce, Collector, who knows what. Or Youmuu's just getting buffed. And hopefully it's, you know, a little bit more assassin only. Duskblade definitely, unfortunately, not the healthiest shape. Lord Dominic's Regards is getting a bug fix to now apply sort of at the correct time in the sequencing of how things work. So this damage amp now comes in before lifesteal is calculated. So now you will lifesteal 0 to 20% more when it was always 0% more. It now amps damage before shields mitigate. So if you were hitting a Nautilus during W, Lord Dominic's didn't do anything, and now it will give you 0 to 20% more damage against Nautilus, or a Scion W, or anyone with a Stone Plate active, or any of those things, Cassandra E and whatnot, and said, well, this is of course a power increase now that it is applying an amp when it wasn't before, and so pick a number out of a hat. Not really, but pick a number that we think is going to be reasonable. Hey, it's going to do up to 3% reduced bonus damage, but it's also going to apply more frequently and whatnot. And you're going to get more lifesteal, and hey, the item is better. Congratulations. Cool. Good. That's the right change. This is going to be ended up probably roughly power neutral. Want to point out one thing. I've seen a lot of people be confused by something. They kept asking, does this mean shields count as bonus health? No, shields do not count as bonus health. This is just simply the order of application. If you were shielded, you weren't getting anything. This is not raise your health difference from 1500 to 1800 because you have a shield on you. That's not how this works. So because Duskblade is going down, we want to incentivize that Youmuu's actually, and the funny thing is, like, we probably could have just shipped, aside from like the bug fixes to Duskblade from earlier, we maybe could have just been like, oh, we could have lightly nerfed Youmuu's and kind of kept Duskblade where it was, and we probably ended up being happier if Youmuu's was the primary assassin mythic. Of all the classes allowed to roam, I think assassins are number one. More than anyone else, assassins should be allowed and encouraged to roam. Yes, it sucks to be an AD carry and you're level 5 and level 6 Zed shows up and kills you. I'm sorry. I also play bot lane. It hurts sometimes. They're assassins. They're meant to kill people. The alternative is you get Mage Zed, who's a team fighter. It's probably not any better for the game. But anyway, hey, here's Umbral Glaive. Part of being a valuable assassin is you have vision control. Here's Youmuu's Ghostblade. Part of being an assassin is you have better map mobility than everyone else in the game. Here's what, right, just like giving assassins something other than just like, I'm a generic team fighter or I always one-shot you. It's like, oh, I have better target access. I might not one-shot you, but I can at least push you out of the game, right? Like, right, a 48% win rate Zed who cannot roam has to do so much more damage than a 48% win rate Zed who can roam, right? Like, assuming win rate has to be zero sum and Zed will just be a 48% win rate champion forever, do you really want the Zed who one-shots you on just a serrated Dirk, or do you want the Zed who can roam and, like, forces a recall? And, like, that's a similar amount of power, right? Like, that's probably correct. Anyway, Youmuu's Ghostblade. Basically, increase in Spectral Shard lethality by a pretty meaningful amount. It is still a little bit lower than the release version of this item, but overall, have some more lethality, go have fun. Okay. Next big suite of changes, we're not done, it's the jungle update. Yes, I know it is the semi-annual jungle update, I know it's frustrating, I know it's annoying to keep having the way your role works change in front of you. Honestly, if we do not come close to hitting our goals for lowering jungle agency, there's very likely a iteration coming in for 14.1. That said, as much as I know the memes around the semi-annual jungle update are not unfounded, very frequently all that happens is the numbers go back to what they were, right? Like the camp spawn timers have been 2 minutes, 2:15, and 2:30 at multiple points in time across the years. So, you know, it's just a throwback, right? It's like deleting mythic items. I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about what's going on here. I don't want to preamble too long. Essentially what it comes down to is, like, jungle as a role is extremely overpowered. It has basically all the agency in the game. The role is simply too strong, and so it's trying to find ways where we can lower the power of jungle as a role in the least hurtful ways to junglers as possible. And in fact, when possible, give junglers something that is actually good that they're going to appreciate in the patch as well. Okay. So first up, the PvP damage on Smite is going down a large amount. It is still a slow. It is still going to do all the same PvE damage. It is simply going to deal less damage to champions. This is basically what we'll call cosmetic damage. The number is there. It will pop Dark Harvest. It will do a thing. It will lower their health bar. It will get you your assist. It'll do whatever. But hey, it is less good at actually killing enemy champions. To be fair, the taking a smite for 140 damage and dying to it did always feel kind of weird and cheesy to me. I think this is a reasonable thing to provide, that unless we say that, you know, Smite is going to be a real summoner spell and it like converts into Ignite or something, and has like maybe the respectable cooldown that actually commands, that's very hard to do. And so ultimately, yeah, it's going to be weak in PvP. You are still the masters of securing epic monsters and whatnot, and you still have the best target access of anyone in the game because you are not tethered to a lane. The PvP damage is going down. There is a new mechanic, though, where Smite, now if your cursor is near an epic monster, but not currently on top of a valid target like a Cho'Gath, or a Tibbers, or a Scuttle Crab, if it's in within 3 or 5 units of, you know, Dragon or Baron or whatever, it will pretend as though you targeted Dragon or Baron. So that, like, someone setting a Shaco clone or Tibbers or Daisy or anything else will not block your Smite. You can just move your cursor off to the side and press D. If you're using F for Smite, I have words for you. Press D, and it will target the epic monster within 350 units. Epic monsters can't be leashed that far, so it pretty much always has to be. I mean, unless someone literally summons a on-purpose Rift Herald right next to Dragon, okay, it might target the summoned Rift Herald. If your cursor's close to that one, then the Drake. That's obviously really, really troll. But anyway, yeah, it will go to the nearest epic monster. This does not increase your cast range. You will still walk into your normal cast range. It will just pretend as though you targeted that thing. Very, very, very minor thing. Tier 3 Smite is now full AoE, so you will like basically always one-shot all the small raptors. You will come close to one-shotting all the small wolves. But it's a very, very minor thing here. This is not meant to be like, here's your power. It's just like, hey, it's free. Like, we'll just give it to you. The number is just the big number. It's fine. Minor thing, though, is that Smite is now going to count as a proc effect. This is a consistency pass against other damaging summoner spells, such as Ignite. This also means that Smite will not have its slow overwritten by Red Smite, by Red Pet. You can apply those debuffs separately, so you can actually tease out more slow. So it's a slight agency kind of control increase, but also means, like, if you're, for example, Zac or Maokai, you don't get to Smite and apply Demonic Embrace. So it is a very, very light nerf to things like Demonic Embrace. Or I guess Riley's slow is slightly more potent than Smite slow. Really minor things there, but hey, that is going to be true. By the way, again, Dark Harvest, I believe, only cares about dealing damage, so Dark Harvest will still happen, but you won't like trigger Comet and things like that. Okay, moving forward. Actually, we have the numbers here. Here is, sorry for the flashbang. Here is the amount of damage that you are dealing to enemy champions with Smite. Level 6 is around when you get the first evolve. Level 10 is around when you get the second evolve. Not that this was tied to the evolves in any way, but just roughly the breakpoints here. And yes, obviously, again, you are doing 60 or so less true damage to champions in a given fight. Next change, junglers no longer take 20% less damage from epic monsters when more allies are nearby. Junglers already have control over these things with Smite and whatnot. This is a pretty hidden rule that I don't believe was really needed anyway. In fact, your pet still gives you health per second while fighting these monsters, so junglers still disproportionately get more health than other champions do when fighting these camps. Their pet also deals damage. They also deal more damage to these things than other champions normally do. They are still the, rulers of taking down Dragon, Baron, and Rift Herald, but you no longer also take less damage. You only get extra regen when this is happening. Blue Smite has been nerfed by 15% move speed. In both the brush case and the kill a monster case. Green shield no longer gives tenacity, although the shield is very, very slightly stronger. We'll talk about the math in a second. And then red smite now requires you to deal attack or spell type damage. Is purely to let you say, hey, red smite does not have its slow eaten by Scorch. I'll just call it Scorch Claw. Scorch Claw Burn no longer has its slow eaten by Smite. So Scorch Claw Burn is a true damage dot, and it's a decaying slow. But that decaying slow would very quickly intersect with the 20% slow of Smite itself. And so you would very often, not only can you not stack slows in the first place, but you really didn't get almost any beneficial value. And so this allows you to say, okay, well, I'll max range Smite, then get in range, then land a spell, and then I get to refresh my slow by using the red slow there. Or it's my first thing I did was I landed an auto attack and I'm saving Smite anyway. Okay, well then there's no difference, right? But it allows you to say, okay, I can Smite to enter, then walk up, then trigger Scorch Claw, and this allows me to extend the CC duration. And so red Smite should be more usable if you're paying attention to sequencing well, right? So it's a very, very light buff. Again, to be clear, still more of a nerf than a buff. Don't get me wrong. So again, here's the Smite damage. Here is the Moss Stomper shield. Again, level 10 is usually the default conversion level. If you're farming pretty well, often you could be farther behind. It's more level 12 or so. But essentially says that your shield. If you're really ahead of the curve, you can get it. It's a 10% stronger shield early on, sure. But it's the shield is a little bit stronger. 2 to 5% stronger shield. This is pretty trivial. Don't get me wrong. But the tenacity is gone. That's the big deal. And of course, blue smite got nerfed. So a reshape to which smites are good. Let's move forward. And the big thing here is basically I think getting things like tenacity and slow resist should require specific investment. It should require things like Merc Treads and Swifties and even the QSS upgrade and whatnot. I just think it should require more investment than just I took one of the 3 smites and I took Legend Tenacity, which is the rune that everyone takes already, and it's just oh, you're just immune to crowd control. I'm overstating it, to be clear, but I think the places that we have systemic tenacity is very, I don't want to say egregious, that's a bit too strong, but I think there was just far too much systemic tenacity in the wrong places, and so anywhere where I can rip them out, I am happy to do so. And so this is one of those cases. Even if jungle was underpowered, I would do this and buff the shield or something, right? But regardless, overpowered, so it can be nerfed a little bit. Okay, moving forward. So the next thing is a big sweep to how much health camps have. And there's actually a lot of interlocking mechanics here. So we're gonna go over the fact that basically camps have more health late game and a little bit more health in your 2nd through 8th clear. A bunch of random number changes. We'll talk about them when it comes down to it. Bunch of formulas here. Scuttler has different health and different golden XP provided. Krugs give more XP. Monsters have different amounts of attack damage. So we'll stop here and talk about how much health and rewards monsters have. Okay. So we're going to use Gromp as our example basic monster. Gromp is like this. Big Krug is like this. Small Raptors, I believe, are like this. All the Wolves are like this. So basically non-buff camps have a little bit more health at various points in time in your early clears. For example, for reference, if you do a standard 6-camp clear and then reset and buy an item, half of your camps will hit this breakpoint, and half of your camps will hit either the 3 or 5 breakpoint. So essentially, your 2nd clear has 4% more health, and your 3rd clear has 3.5% more health, and your 4th clear has 3 to 3.5% more health. And it's this is not a large decrease in clear speed, but it is a 3 to 4% more damage needs to be dealt to clear your jungle. That is not huge. Consider that a decent portion of your jungle clear is also spent strictly walking from one buff to the next or one camp to the next, right? Raptors to Krugs has a pretty long walk. You can't leash your Raptors all the way there. So the time spent on Raptors is not just the time spent from starting Raptors to arriving at Krugs is not just the clear speed. So the real clear speed is down like 2%. This is not a large change. What it does do, though, is it is feelable. It is feelable to say that, hey, if you don't take your first recall and get a ruby crystal or a couple of long swords or cooldown boots or something, you are really going to feel the 8% more health on the first 2 camps you try to kill when, the Gromp and Wolves respawn at level 4. They have 8% more health. They have, 200 more health each. You're going to feel that compared to yesterday. And you're going to be like, man, I really should have grabbed those long swords or those ruby crystals or whatever. You're going to feel that, and you're going to actually have wished that you had taken the recall. And so it's a nudge to say, hey, take your recall, go shop, keep your items up, because your clear speed will decrease if you don't. Now, a secondary change that we didn't go through in the patch notes, but essentially, the other big change is that every jungle monster just got about 20 more armor and magic resist, but the jungle item gives you, as a jungler, 20% more damage to non-epic jungle monsters. So for a jungler, there is no change. It is the same numbers, it's all identical. To a non-jungler, camps have a lot more health. And what that means is at level 13, when you go to take your Gromp to get its maximum XP value, maximum gold value, you're trying to get, your next cycle and trying to get your gold income in, it's got 5% more health. It'll take you a little bit more time. 200 more HP. It's going to be, 1 more auto attack if you're an AD champion. It's maybe 1 more spell sometimes if you're a tank or whatnot, although stay tuned. It gets a little bit nicer for tanks at some points in time. But hey, that, I don't know, mid lane Ryze who's poaching your camps or your bot lane Caitlyn who's poaching your camps, it's got 25% more health for them. So they are much less likely to poach your Gromp, poach your Krugs, poach your whatever, because it's going to take them a lot longer to kill this thing. And so it's more likely that it's up for you to take. So not only is it your teammates poaching your camps, but the enemy team coming down. This is like if you watched like the World's Qualifying Series, and it's Adam on Garen runs down and just like poaches the Raptor camp and just like, well, I counter jungle the enemy jungler. That is going to happen to you less, to the tune of, right, at every point in time, 20% or so. Right, they have 20% essentially more health. Okay, so that's the math. That's the changes. Congratulations. Right? Okay, great. What am I looking at? I'm trying to think if I'm doing something weird. No, this is what this is. Okay, so most camps are like this. They're like Gromp. Gromp's like this. Big Krugs like this. Wolves are like this. Buff camps. So you can see, like, basically, it's like once you're past level 11, there's like kind of light scaling here. Buff camps substantially scale much harder. And this basically says that in earlier on in the year, right, at mid-season, well, I guess it was 13-11 technically, we said, hey, actually, once the jungle, around level 10 or 11, by the way, finishes their jungle evolve, finishes their item all the way, it's now going to print 2 red buffs and 2 blue buffs, one for the jungler, one for the other side. And there were no changes to the camp themselves. We just, like, doubled the number of buffs in the game. And to me, that seems unfair, unreasonable. And so these camps actually have more health than they currently do. And so their health scales more aggressively past level 11. And indeed, a much later on into the game, red and blue buff has a lot more health. And so it's much less likely that, say, for example, a default mage or whatever takes the blue buff that you could have killed as a jungler, right? This could have been golden XP that you earned. So it's much more likely the jungler is the one who's allowed to grab this camp because, yeah, it turns out that, late game, I don't know, Lux trying to kill blue buff, it has 50% more health than before. It's fairly trivial for the Hecarim. It's only 20% more health. But hey, a pretty meaningful increase here. This is going to be a substantially harder camp to take down on that side. So it is slower. It is slower. It is harder for them to kill. That is the point. That is the goal that's going on here, right? Okay, cool. What's next? What's next? There were a couple camps that had really weird numbers. So the Big Raptor actually had relatively deflated level 1 health, but had sort of different health scaling to where it spiked its health pretty quickly in the mid game. I basically just chose to say, no, these camps should scale at least for the first 11 levels, they should all scale the same so that the amount of health increase is identical. Basically to say that, you know, there's not any weird esoteric optimizations of like, but if you like studied the wiki or something, or like read the 3-year-old patch notes, you'd identify that actually Raptors camp is, you know, it's just like, I don't want that to be the case. I would just like to make everything consistent so that there's no surprises. There's no reason to figure out arcane optimizations, because that's not the, like, I don't want your optimal play to be like, I read the wiki and found a numbers oversight, right? Like, that's not the kind of skills I want to be rewarded. And I say this as like a huge numbers nerd. I don't want that to be the kind of skills rewarded. Big Raptor has more base health, but has a different scaling formula. So it does have 100 more HP on your first clear. This will slow down like most of the Raptor start AoE junglers. Those clears are going to be slower to the tune of 1 or 2 auto attacks. That is a 1 or 2 second slower clear. But basically from that point onwards, it's probably squishier for most points in time until much, much, much later, where eventually, yeah, again, much like the other camps, it has more late game health. But again, now just scales like the other camps do. This is a very, very light touch toward making single target junglers slightly better, since basically if you're an AoE jungler, you always like one-shot the small raptors and sat there autoing the big raptor. But if you're like Lee Sin, your single target damage wasn't really ever in threat, and it was like basically always going to die to like Q2 anyway. And you were kind of like relying on your pet to kill the AoE. So for a lot of single target junglers, you don't really feel this nerf nearly as strongly. But again, still, the poachability of Raptors is down, right, 20% or so, right? Your Raptors are going to be up more often for you, the jungler. Your teammates are taking it less often. That is the intended strength provided. Next up, though, is a reshape to Rift Scuttler's effective health and gold rewards. So the effective health, I thought, scaled far too meagerly for how much reward this thing gave. So most camps give... they don't scale their gold at all, and they give up to 45% more base XP. But keep in mind that when a jungler kills a camp, they also get 80 flat bonus experience, which means that like a Krug camp, for example, is worth, I believe the number is 133 base experience. So 133 times 1.45, right, is like another 60-ish. So it goes from being worth like 213 to being worth to do like 273, right? That's like how much it scales. 216 to 273, roughly the math, right? So it's like actually not that big. It's like, oh, camps gain like 20% more XP value. Maybe it's more like 30% more XP value, but they don't gain in gold. They get a little bit more XP and that's it. Rift Scuttler grows substantially in both gold and experience. Like percentage wise, right? This is what, 80%? No, 40%? 80% more gold and 80% more experience baseline. Like, that is extremely high. That is aggressively scaling. Wow. Rift Scuttler goes from being a, like, relatively normal camp by being worth 100 base XP and 55 base gold, which is, like, not that far from Raptors, to being worth 99 base gold, which is the highest of any camp. I think it's, like, roughly tied with Krugs, but it's more than Gromp or any buff or Wolves or Raptors. And also, since the XP gain grows by 80%, it's also 180 base XP, which is about what the top end of Krugs lands at. So, like, Rift Scuttler is better than Krugs with less health than Krugs. Wait, this is the best camp. Also, it puts a vision cone on the ground. Scuttle's is the best camp in the game, and it's not close. Wow, this camp is extremely overpowered. And so it's like, okay, we are actually just going to nerf Scuttler, essentially, because this camp is very, very, very OP. It still doesn't fight back, you still heal off it, right? Your jungle pet gets in combat, you get missing health when you kill it, you know, whatever. But yes, substantially increasing the amount of health on Rift Scuttler to have it more match something reasonable, right? You know, 4,000 to 5,000, you know, health, like, yeah, it's around what buffs are, it's around what Gromp is. This seems pretty reasonable, right? It has a normal camp's worth of health. This seems fine. In terms of total rewards, actually, it's better in the late game. But it is nerfed earlier on because, hey, none of these camps scale nearly as hard. So, I mean, it's still better than them, right? Don't, and again, this is both the base gold reward and the base XP reward are scaling by the same percentage. But yeah, look, really, really later on, yes, we made this thing 60% tankier. So yes, the rewards are even better. So this is, look, in the very, very late game, Scuttle is a really, really valuable objective. It's worth a boatload of gold, a boatload of XP. Later on, you really, really like Scuttle. It just has a respectable amount of HP that you have to care about. Okay, great. I think the reshape here is correct. Again, I think like identifying that, Scuttle extremely outscales other camps, I just think is like not terribly intuitive. I think its health again was completely not in line with its overall reward structure, because it also gives a 1 minute long like vision circle on the ground. Like that's also like maybe not more valuable than red buff, but like more valuable than Gromp. And so yeah, to me, like this is a much more appropriate shape for this kind of objective. Then finally, there's some really minor things, which was when a bunch of jungle camps got updated earlier on in the year, Krugs got skipped. And so medium and small Krug are actually getting their health updated. Small Krugs don't matter. They get one shot by any effect. And your pet damage actually capped per tick at 20% of the Krugs of mini Krug's health. And so you literally always run into the cap. So changing mini Krug health doesn't matter. They always die to any Tiamat type of active. They always would take 5 ticks from your pet, no matter what the health total really was. But anyway, medium Krug has a bit more health because that one didn't get scaled the appropriate way. And so yes, medium Krug is now meaningfully tankier. This will slow down your Krug clears a little bit, because even for a jungler, the medium Krug itself, now small Krugs again unaffected, big Krugs no different from the data table earlier on. Medium Krug is tankier. Full stop, right? Again, not on the first clear, but second onwards. But one thing that was also overlooked was the XP reward for both medium and small Krugs. That when XP got increased on, I think it was camp levels like, you can see here, right? Camp level 5, 6, 7, up through 9, those pieces got overlooked. And so this is the total throughput XP of the camp, including the jungle items. This is the total actual experience gained by the jungler. And it is not massive, to be clear. It was, pretty small, but it's like, hey, yeah, this camp is now worth 2 to 4% more total XP than it was before. The price is that medium Krug, only medium Krug, is about 10 to 15% tankier. In some cases, you never felt this anyway. In the case of something like Briar, it's like, well, I'm actually already AoEing it with my W, or there's a million other things like Nocturne Q and passive, or just Lilia existing, never cares about this. There's going to be some who do, don't get me wrong, but just, again, the consistency pass say, no, this camp is meant to scale as well as the other camps do. So Krugs now have the appropriate amount of experience. Here you go. So the next set of changes is to how much damage monster camps deal. And by the way, they deal less damage. This is how much health you get back from killing jungle monsters. And we know we changed the health of camps. We're going to change the scaling of how much damage your jungle companion deals. The AD ratio is going away. The armor MR ratio is getting buffed. The AP ratio is getting very, 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 very lightly nerfed. Very, very lightly nerfed. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on here. So here is a Grump hitting someone at full health and someone at half HP. So every jungle monster camp, by the way, has a base attack damage, and that base attack damage scales with champion level. They also, deal percent current health damage per hit that is tuned per large monster. So here is basically a relatively squishy champion. My example target health is here. Here it is on your screen. This is basically just like generic, like fighter shaped champion doesn't buy bonus health. This is like a Master Yi type champion or a Kha'Zix type champion, or even a Kha'Zix buys something like bonus health via Edge of Night. But generic squishy type champion has this much health roughly, and says, okay, if you're full health, how much damage is Gromp dealing you to you per hit? Again, not changing the first clear, but a solid 5% ish less damage from the Gromp. If you're low, and so the percent current health damage doing less heavy lifting, it's more like 5 to 10% less damage per hit from the Gromp. The lower you are, the less this does. So if for some reason we get the tuning really wrong and champions don't have nearly as much health, well, the lower you are, the more that matters. Like, hey, if we took, if it was like, oh, actually, you're at, like this is what, half of 5% current health damage. So let's say you're at 20% HP. Let's say you're really, really low for some reason. You're like struggling to clear your camps. and you're something like this, okay, well, Gromp is doing, again, in some cases, like 13% less damage. So, sometimes it's a little bit nicer. Anyway, the math, right? Yeah, math is appropriate. Okay. So monsters do a little bit less damage. Okay, fine. Next thing is the companion damage radius is being shrunk a little bit. This can mean if small Krugs are straggling, you might not hit them all, so be kind of paid some attention there. But it mostly means that if you're fighting Rift Scuttler in River, it won't like aggro Baron or Rift Herald or Dragon. The radius is now small enough where you'd have to like really push things into the pit for it to hit those monsters. It's calling out that your companion heal per second is still 70% of the damage dealt. But again, the armor and MR ratio is going up. The AD ratio and AP ratio is going slightly down. But there's now actually an implemented hard cap in how much heal per second come out of the companion. We'll do all this math in a second, okay? Let's talk about it. Okay. So, and the other change, by the way, is the amount of health you get when you kill a monster is changing from a flat amount that scales based on missing health to percent missing health, right? So monsters deal less damage. Your pet does some level of different things based on the champion you are. Monsters have less AD. Your healing is different. Let's talk about what's going on here. Okay, so here is how much health you get from killing a monster before and after if you are a squishy champion at 3/4 health versus 1/4 health. And so the amount of health you're getting off the camp is, down, 30, 50. Eventually, as you get towards later on in the game, you can be losing a lot. Now, to be fair, this is you're usually you're missing out 1/4 of like this much health, right? So you're missing out somewhere between we'll just kind of put it out on the screen. Let's change the numbers around. It's a number. Let's make the shading not horrible. So like if you're missing somewhere between like 150 and 600 health, instead of getting about a fifth of that back, you're getting very little of that back. Right, you're getting 12% if you're missing health back. If you got lower and lower, right, if you're missing 3 times as much, you're missing most of your health bar. Instead of getting 300 health back, you're getting 200 health back. This is for the squishy champions, right? This is guys who are not buying any bonus health at all. They're getting substantially less health back. Now, the more bonus health you have, the less bad this is. If you're missing 3/4, and part of this is like this is a little bit fraudulent because it's much harder to sort of miss 1/4 of a large health bar. But let's just kind of talk about it, right? So. Hey, if your health bar is much larger, you have more HP overall, you have more bonus HP or whatever. Even if you're doing relatively high health clears, the healing is only about half what it was. Not, as bad, but you are getting less health, right? You are coming out of your jungle less full HP. But if you are quite low, if your clears do suck, if the monsters are punching you way too hard, if your clear is way too slow, something going on, well, it's much less severe, and especially in the late game when you are getting more and more and more health, it actually can be better when you're really, really, really low. But yeah, to be clear, the end up result here is that, hey, you are going to come out of the jungle with less health, especially in the early game. You can see kind of in the late game, it gets a lot closer, right? Right, you can kind of see it here as well, right? As we get later into the game, it gets a little bit closer. The first clear, certainly, yes, of course, quite a bit weaker. So what this does is it basically says that, hey, when you're clearing your jungle and you're going for your first gank, especially, you are going to have much more missing health. You are much more likely to have to actually buy that potion on your first clear. You're much more likely to smite your red or your Krugs, the last of your 2 camps to get this thing out, to get it out of the way so that they don't punch you as hard. So you're not saving it for Scuttle Crab as often. And when you go for a gank, you are taking more damage, right? You're not going to level 1 gank somebody. You're going to kill at least 3 camps, and those camps are going to do the same damage to you, right? Because up here, right, the amount of damage they deal to you is unchanged. I didn't undo all the numbers here. Don't worry about it. It should be that, right? They're doing as much damage to you as they were before. They have as much health as they did before, but you are getting less health off of taking down the camp. The junglers are going to have less health fishing in the jungle, so when they come for a gank, they are much less likely to be full health on this gank. They're less likely to be full health on this gank, right? That is the primary thrust here. They're going to have less full health on the gank, less health on the gank. It also means that later on, even if you are quite low, your ability to come in, and we'll use this one, right? We'll say like, hey, you are, actually, the funny thing is, like, this tanky option, like, this is basically, like, the types of items like Hecarim and Jarvan and Lee Sin, build where it's like Gordic or whatnot, like, this is most fighters are just, like, in this world, right? Where it's like, actually, it's not that bad. But it means that, hey, I successfully ganked top lane or whatever, there's a fight going on, I'm going to dip into my jungle, I'm going to kill Gromp, I'm going to kill wolves, I'm going to come back out at full HP. That is a thing that I'm specifically trying to target by saying, hey, you cannot top yourself off. If you get back above half HP, you're going to get much, much less health from these camps. If the top laner has to recall, if the mid laner has to recall, the bot laner has to recall, the support has to recall, you also have to recall. You also have to go back and get your health back up the normal way. You can't just go infinite around the map forever. You've got to take your recalls, get your health back up, and do the normal thing. Now again, because camps do percent current health damage, the lower you're getting, the less damage is actually going to deal to you. And the lower you're getting, the more relative value this heal is going to be. And so you can, if you are very, very low, right, the heal can actually be better than it currently is on live, but you cannot just simply top yourself off and go back to full health as a jungler compared to the live version of the game. So now let's go into the math around companion. So first up, this is the amount of damage per second coming from the companion for a champion like Lee Sin, who's a champion that builds a mix of attack damage and bonus HP. Keep in mind the AD ratio got nerfed to 0. The health ratio did not change, and the bonus ratio got doubled from 0.1 to 0.2. And so with steel caps and a death dance and the GA somewhere in his midst, it's basically unchanged at level 1. Right, you're losing 0.54 from the stat shard, and you're getting 0.6 from the armor stat shard. No different, no big deal here. Level 1 clear, identical. And honestly, like, this is also kind of fake because you're not buying until around here. So it's all kind of fake. It's actually all the same number. You have, trivially, slightly more damage. Like, this is fake. It's technically slightly more damage from your pet in your really, really early clears. Okay. If you are Kha'Zix and if you are running 2 attack damage stat shards, then actually it is going to be weaker. Again, the first few levels of this are fake. These are more likely to be the numbers here. You are losing a little bit, right? You are losing about 0.48 damage per second. You're losing less than 0.5 damage per second here. On someone like Jungle Kha'Zix, it is not that big of a deal. You're getting less than 0.1 damage per second gained if you're running 1 adaptive damage and 1 armor. So pretty small, all things considered, but hey, technically here is how much DPS is coming out of your companions. It is very, very lightly different. Okay, great. What else are we going to talk about? And you can see, of course, that if all you're getting is bonus AD and a very, very small amount of bonus health, something like Edge of Night, or maybe you're getting armor because you got a Mountain Drake or something. Yeah, you are not getting any companion DPS if you're doing a conventional assassin build. That is true. And if we need to retune jungle assassins to make them have better clears or something, that is easy to do. We're happy to do that. If they fall off, we can tune them. That is fine. Let's talk about, though, what you do get from getting lethality, which is the fact that you get the stat lethality. You get a little bit something nice. You get a little bit something better. Congratulations. You get lethality. Okay. And now that small monsters all have 20 armor instead of 0 armor, it means that a serrated dirk is a damage increase to these items. Now, again, of course, like, the first few clears you don't have serrated dirk, but like around, actually maybe even around here you might have it where, you got first blood off of a gank or whatever, you got serrated dirk first back, and now, oh, look, my pet does deal less damage, right? Like, my pet has, 5 less DPS. But I also do just globally 2% more damage to every small monster. That is every auto attack, that is every Q, that is every W, that is every E. I deal 2% more damage to small monsters because my lethality now does something. I'm playing Jarvan. My Jarvan Q shreds armor by a percentage. This now does more than it used to because the big camps have even more armor than before. The small camps now have armor. Briar Q has an armor shred on it. All these kind of things have some, it's not huge, but it's some level of effect where those abilities do something and clear those camps that little bit faster. Those stats have an effect. Okay, great. On the other side, though, of course, large monsters have more armor and MR than before, which means it devalues low levels of lethality. So again, once again, these numbers are kind of fake initially. Because you're not going to get lethality at level 2 or 3 or whatever, but you can see here that, as you trend towards the mid game, if you don't have a lot of lethality on yet, you don't have enough armor penetration to make up for it, that you're getting slightly less damage against the larger camps because, 10 lethality against 20 armor is better than 10 lethality against 40 armor. So it's slightly worse earlier on. out. It kind of hurts a little bit. Again, better against the small camps, worse against the big camps. I think the overall trade seems more than reasonable if I'm looking at the percentages here. But eventually you get to the point where you would have had more than 20 lethality, and hey, congratulations, you get a bigger damage amp out of this. And actually, these calculations are a little bit fraudulent because I'm prorating the full Kha'Zix build, which his most common build right now is actually 3 lethality items into no more. But it's like Serylda's Grudge is automatically just better in all forms of this, because you get percent armor penetration. That's just strictly better. If you got your Serrated Dirks earlier on than this, you would hit that power spike much sooner. Like, you know, if you're on just Yomu's plus Serrated Dirk, you're on 28 lethality. That is automatically better than live. Like, and that's like around here. So the interpolation here is not perfect, but it's something more like that. So hey, by the way, you know, just some math to talk about here for someone like Kha'Zix, someone who's playing full assassin. Okay, what about the companion for someone like Nidalee? So Nidalee doesn't get hurt nearly as hard by the ability power shard nerfed, and of course does get the full value of the armor shard buff. So congratulations, Nidalee gets a very slightly faster early clear, buys bonus health through things like Shadow Flame and Night Harvester, which again are not getting buffed in a direct way, but the 2% AP ratio nerf just means very little, and ultimately like the pet DPS is down trivially. This functionally doesn't matter for mages. It's functionally unchanged. I just dropped it down a very little bit. The meaningful one though is someone like Zac, who does buy a meaningful amount of armor in Magic. So what did we talk about earlier, right? What did we talk about with camp health earlier, right? So camp health, right, is up. That's from the right. So camp health is up, 4-ish. 3 to 4% in the mid game, and then eventually 20% late game. And for a tank, now to be clear, the tank's base damages did not change, right? Like the amount of damage coming out of Zac Q or Zac W doesn't change very much. If Zac W is not hitting the monster health cap, then the monster's getting bonus health does not matter. Because he's getting percent health damage out of things like his Q. Zac W is getting percent health damage out of his W. Amumu is getting max health damage out of his W. So like there's some of these tank champions who actually just like ignore this mechanic entirely in the first place. But regardless, the pet damage, because it now has a good armor and MR ratio, actually is much nicer here, and you start getting some, somewhat meaningful DPS increases here to say that, hey, if you have to rush steel caps against an AD team, you're getting as much damage per gold from your cloth armors as you were from ruby crystals. Now again, it's a pretty light touch, right? You're already getting pretty good DPS out of building tank health, but essentially it says that, look, if you're playing Kha'Zix, you are getting very little bonus pet damage out of bonus AD, but you know what? You are getting bonus pet damage out of buying lethality. And if you're playing Lee Sin, you're getting, no bonus damage out of buying AD, but hey, that bonus health you're buying is giving you some clear speed. And hey, Nidalee is giving you some benefits out of buying ability power. It's giving you some benefits out of buying health. And hey, if you're playing Zac, you're often getting no ability power. You're getting no attack damage. These things don't give you clear speed at all. Well, buying health helps you. Buying armor helps you. The point here is to close the gap between the fact that tank junglers are kind of griefing by going high econ, because they can't, because their clear speeds can't keep up. And it could be that we should go much harder on all these ratios. And it could be that, actually, you know what? That's cool, we made these changes, but actually, the armor ratio should go higher, the MR ratio should go higher, the health ratio should go higher. Let's encourage the ability to clear your jungle and say, yes, I recalled, I got a Giant's Belt, this meaningfully improves my experience. Very amenable to that. We will measure the results of the changes and make any changes that are needed to have happen, right? Okay, next set of changes are to lane. Oh yeah, and sorry, a quick thing to point out is companion heal per second now has a cap. This is basically just a Rammus rule and a late game top off in your jungle rule. So there is a cap on how much heal per second come out of your companion. That cap is 12 to 45 linear scaling from level 1 to level 12. So real quick, just to point it out, right? 12 divided by 0.7 is 17. Right? And it's 45, right? Yeah. And 45 divided by 0.7 is 64. So if your pet DPS does not grow beyond 17 to 64, you are not running into a pet damage cap. So for Lee Sin, 17 to 64. Yeah, only much later on here would it finally matter, and then even with the changes, right? Yeah, this is basically trivial. For Kha'Zix, he never hit the cap anyway. For Nidalee, she eventually hit the cap much later on, but again, level 15 plus, a little bit of sustain, pretty trivial. For Zac, he could hit the cap at about the same time he would hit the cap normally, so Zac actually does run into the new healing cap. He still gets the DPS, but his healing is going to be capped when it arguably wouldn't have been before. So, hey, Zac is now running into a small healing cap. So the tanks, who do benefit greatly from bonus armor and bonus MR, keep in mind that buying armor makes monsters deal less damage to you. So armor already kind of double dips the healing because it mitigates damage and then also turns into pet DPS, which then turns into healing. So the only champions who actually run into the cap in a meaningful way are the ones who are already benefiting from buying armor and thus needing the pet healing less. So basically what this really does, it says that Rammus does not heal for 120 health per second while fighting Dragon. That's what the rule is about, is to say that Rammus does not heal while taking epic monsters. That's what ran in. That's what happened when we buffed these ratios. And I want to point out, by the way, that like this is like Zac. This guy's like kind of chilling, right? Sejuani gets much more armor MR. Rammus gets massively more armor MR. Ball curl is a substantial bonus increase. And keep in mind, right? This ratio is bonus armor, bonus MR. So like the amount that ball curl gives you is very, very large and is a substantial increase here. And it's part of why the cap has to be here, is to like, hey, I think this ratio shouldn't be fake. So we started at it matches the health ratio. We added the cap as the Rammus rule. And again, happy to tune things up as needed if they are required. Alrighty. Mentioned earlier that there's some anti-poaching stuff going on. This is what I mentioned before. You do 42% more damage to monsters now. Large monsters have 42 armor MR. Small monsters have 20 armor MR. Lethality now scales against these. Having more than one lethality item now scales against these. Again, the fact that you have bonus damage means you're not going to feel it, but it does mean that non-junglers are going to feel quite the difference in their ability to kill these camps. That is intended. That is what's meant to be. That is what's supposed to be. I do think realistically, there's a world where we should actually reshape this to like everything has like, I don't know, 30 or 40 or some number, and reshape the health values just so that there's more consistency. But I went for something pretty small. I didn't want to reshape all the health numbers, but it can make it really clean. It's like just the numbers are 30 and you do 30% more damage or 40% more damage, whatever the number actually is, and that's just kind of the math. Okay. So the next direct jungle nerf is to lane minion XP. So the way lane minion XP works on live is if you have a jungle item, for the first 14 minutes of the game, you get less XP from nearby lane minions. Basically, your champion just has a multiplier on it that says when I gain XP from a barracks minion, multiply that number by this number, and I get the resulting value instead. That cap ends at 14 minutes unless you finish your jungle item, which is possible, in which case you were just locked at only getting 70% XP from lane minions for the rest of the game. So that bug has been fixed. This is absolutely a direct buff, just the bug fix, to champions like Hecarim, who could actually power clear so fast they would actually finish this in time. It was possible. It wasn't super common, but it was possible. This has been stretched out to 20 minutes and on average increased as a penalty. Let's talk about the numbers, which are these. So at 30 seconds, which is of course fake, doesn't really exist. So hey, again, this like just really can't exist here. I don't know what, oh, this is nothing. This doesn't exist. Yeah, this of course can't exist. This probably wouldn't exist, but here is the table of how much XP you're getting from lane minions before and after. And you can see here that if we like average the entire thing, right, from 1.5 to 1.95 minutes, what we get is about 7% less XP across time. Now, is directly averaging the exact right choice? Probably not, but the end result is you get 7% less XP from poaching or sharing in a lane. A jungler gets 7% less experience from sharing in a lane. There's an extra rule, which is that this would go away. So much like catch-up XP for junglers, junglers got a catch-up XP rule where they would get bonus experience from large monsters if they were behind the average level of the game. That average level is if they are 1.5 levels behind the 9 highest level champions of the game. So the single lowest champion is discarded, the other 9 are averaged, and if you are at least 1.5 levels behind that average, XP, catch-up XP would kick in, and you would get bonus XP from large monsters. That rule also exists for lane maintenance, where this rule disappears if you are behind the average. Now, this one was also 1.1. So a few patches ago, the jungle XP got changed from 1.1 to 1.5. Instead of rounding up, it just rounds. This is doing the same thing here to the lane rule, where if you're 1.1 behind, now it's 1.5 behind, which just requires, 4 more champions to have leveled up to have passed you. So you are much less likely for going to the lane to be the appropriate way to earn gold and experience. Because you will just get about 7% less XP. Now, your jungle camps will take a bit longer to clear. They will give you less health. The Scuttle Crab in the early game is going to give you fewer rewards. And the end result is that, but you're going to have, ultimately, the end result is Jungler's going to have fewer resources. But those resources are going to be left up for them a bit more because non-junglers can poach jungle camps less than before. So the junglers themselves will have more resources. That is the entire point. That is the intent here. That is why this is happening. Junglers themselves will have more resources because their resource will not be disappearing from in front of them nearly as often. Okay. Next big set of changes, like maybe small, whatever, but it's like, hey, look, the first jungle clear is probably going to be a bit less healthy. Now, I will be honest, I've been playing on these changes for over a month now internally. Everyone can clear. The game feels fine. Junglers have control over the game. Like, this stuff functions. Like, honestly, I really don't notice a difference that much. And I jungle a bunch on live as well. Briar is my most played champion over the last month at this point. They're not that feelable. They matter. Like, you are going to come out a little bit less health than before. I play non-Briar jungle as well. But the point is, like, hey, this has an effect. Anyway, the other thing, though, is that your early ganks are going to be weaker. It's kind of fun. This also kind of dovetails into the game's going to be less snowbally. So, starter items are getting buffed. Basically, Doran's Blade. So, basically, 2 AD and 20 health, 3 AP and 20 health, 30 health and a little bit more regen. Dark Shield gets a little bit with 10 health, 2 AP and 20 health, 1 AD and 20 health, 1 AD and 15 health, 2 AP and 15 health. So if you are ganking the bot lane, they have, 3 more attack damage or 2 more AD and 2 more AP. They have 20 to 15 more health. If you gank the mid laner has 3 more AP and 20 more health. Essentially, the relative power level of laners compared to junglers is 2 AD, 20 health, roughly, which means the power of that first gank is that little bit weaker. Obviously, if you're in the 1v1, your teammate that is helping also has plus 2 AD, so hey, they're going to help you kind of finish that kill and whatnot, but essentially says, hey, the relative power of the jungler who's walking in with double buffs, frequently with a level lead, with maybe a summoner spell lead, with maybe a health bar lead, with almost certainly a mana bar lead, with a positioning lead, hey, you don't also have a gigantic stat lead. Because maybe you're +1 level, but at least their starting items are better. If this means junglers want to take their first recall for Doran's Blade, go for it. Feel free. That is fine. Go for it. If you want to buy a Doran's Blade as your first recall and you buy Doran's Blade plus boots, super okay with that. Go for it. That seems totally reasonable. I am down for you to make that choice. That's totally fine. The fact of the matter is Dark Seal is so overpowered that like every mage jungler, anyone with like moderately okay AP ratios, would take their first back and they'd probably just go boots Dark Seal. And if they could, put other components in, control or whatever, yeah, of course they would. But like, if you want to go buy Doran's Blade, go for it. I'm down. It's totally fine. This does actually have some anti-snowballing mechanics as well, because it's much less likely you're going to go longsword 3-pots and instead just go Doran's Blade. Which means just a lot of lanes are going to be less snowbally because you're going to hit Epic Power Spike slower. You're going to hit Mythic Power Spike slower. And just these champions in general are going to have like 100 more health. So like, if there is a massive sea change where the number of people who go longsword 3-pot just like drops by 80% of bot laners have 100 more health now. That makes the game way less lethal. Imagine we gave every champion 100 base health. That's like bigger than durability update, at least for the early game. Like that is huge and could be the result of what happens here, right? This could have a absolutely massive ramification for early game snowballing because the all-in ability goes way down. Obviously, supports have no choice. Supports only gain 15 to 20 health, but a lot of AD carries, a lot of mages could gain a lot here. Okay. One more minor final change is a nerf to water walking. This is basically saying, hey, again, we're really not super happy with roaming on maybe non-assassins, and it's like, yes, Relentless Hunter exists on purpose, Mobility Boots exist on purpose, but hey, Water Walking is kind of just the best rune in a lot of cases. It's aggressively a jungle rune. What this does, though, it says, look, you can be the best fighter in the river, right? Like, if a jungler says, no, I'm going to grab this so that I beat everyone because I get a level 1 longsword if I'm in the river, that, yeah, great, right? I am the king of the crabs because I have water walking is super okay with me, right? Like, you have an OP Doran's item, I have water walking, my stats are close, we can fight over crab, we can fight over dragon. That is, I think, a very reasonable thing to give water walking. Like, you have more stats in the river, you can fight. I think that's super fine. What scares me is just shrinking the map. I think the map actually feels a little small right now, just in terms of how much just lightly over time mobility has increased as we've just made items with move speed on them, and just the amount of ways to get mobility has increased slowly over time. I mean, blue smite literally exists. Junglers just gain ghost when walking through brush. Like, the map is smaller. Blast plants skip walls, right? Just the map just is more connected now, and it's like, hey, we can walk back some of this. We can walk back 15 bonus move speed in the river. The fact that it's literally called water walking, there was also a like movement in like looking particle on your champion. Yeah, it has to keep some move speed, but yeah, it can be mostly about the adaptive force, and the move speed buff is a little bit cosmetic. I think that's fine. Here is the data table, by the way, and how much it actually gives you. It's not trivial, right? Like, it's a level 4 longsword. When you're going for the scuttle crab fight, you have a longsword. You have pretty substantially more attack damage than before. We can add the decimals if you want, and it's like, yeah, this is 3.7 more attack damage. It's not a huge amount, but it's not trivial. So yeah, I think this is pretty valuable. I think this is pretty good, and I think these are good changes just to make the game a little bit less ganky. Okay. Next big systems update in this patch is some anti-snowballing adjustments. So this was, so I had led the jungle changes. I ended up finishing the Cassante changes, though they were mostly implemented by the time I grabbed the project. Snowballing was done by a different designer on our team. Actually, random thing I want to point out, actually. So the Summoner's Rift team live pod, what people call the balance team. I just want to this is like a tangent, but I want to kind of bring it up. The complaint I see very common is the silver balance team. Now, I am super down to receive criticism. You're like, hey, this change is bad. Here's why the change is bad. If you say this change is bad, you're silver, one, that's not productive, and two, you are incredibly wrong. So I am the lowest ranked designer on the live pod. I finished last split Diamond 2. I am the lowest ranked designer on the live pod. Right? Like, it goes up from there. I don't know. And you can say, like, hey, D2 is low elo or whatever if you want. That's fine. That was, I think, 1.9%, I think, right? I was, 2 standard deviations. But, yeah, I'm not Masters. I'm not Diamond 1. I'm certainly not GM. I'm certainly not Challenger. I'm certainly not a pro player, right? There were obviously gaps in my knowledge of the game. But I'm the lowest ranked one, right? So it's the designer who made these changes is Masters, right? Dude's really fucking good at League of Legends. Just hey, again, welcome the criticism when you have actual criticism. You can't say that the silver balance team. That's just not accurate. Our QA is Grandmasters. One of our producers is Masters, right? Even the non-designers are typically really, really good at League of Legends. It's a really highly skilled team, actually. Anyway, that tangent aside, snowballing adjustments. So, gonna try to go briefly on the context here. I gave more in the other videos, but the game is very, very snowbally. We think this is somewhat contributing to toxicity because players, especially high elo players, are kind of correct to say, well, if I'm 0-3, the game is probably over because someone who's 3-0 has probably just snowballed the game and will snowball the game. Especially when it's probably going to be a jungler doing that, and junglers have all the agency. Junglers going down helps because then everyone else can have a say over who wins. But ultimately, hey, we think the game just overall from a like game like quality perspective is too snowbally. The game is too snowbally, so we want to make the game less snowbally. We want to preserve as much individual power as possible, but even that being said, what we want is how am I trying to say this? We want as many ancillary sources of power as possible to go down. Okay, so let's talk about all these things and go through them. So first up, the power per Drake for everything but Chemtech Drake is going down. So it's a 28, right? Yeah, 2/7. It's a 28% nerf to Cloud Drake. It is a 33% nerf to Hextech Drake. It is a 40% nerf to Infernal Drake. It is a 37% nerf to Mountain Drake. And it is a 20% nerf to Ocean Drake, right? So each stack is getting 20 to 40% weaker. That said, once you have all 4 Drake stacks, and again, each stack is 20 to 40% weaker, the soul is a bit stronger. So the 4 stacks are about 30% lower, but the soul is some percent stronger. So it's a 1/3 stronger passive move speed Cloud Drake. It is a, slightly bigger slow on Hex Drake. It's a bigger burst damage on Infernal Drake. Keep in mind the AD and AP ratios here haven't changed. The base shield on Mountain Soul is up. The base regen on Ocean goes up again. The ratios aren't changing here. The point here is to say, look, if you are snowballing and you're getting some early objectives, you are going to get less out of them, right? You're going to get something. You're going to build towards a soul, and the soul should still be very, very valuable. But like even the Infernal Drake soul, it's like let's say you got a 4 Infernal Soul for some reason. It's like, okay, well, I do 20 more damage by explosion, but also I'm getting 12% bonus AD instead of 20% bonus AD. So I'm getting, somewhere between like 8 to 16 to sometimes, 24 less attack damage. I mean, 24 attack damage is probably just better than 20 damage on the explosion, right? So like even the soul itself, like the total value of the soul, and to be fair, like Infernal Drake is the most nerfed one, right, by being 40% weaker. So I'm doing the biggest overstatement possible, to be clear. But like, in the extreme case of a 4 Infernal Drake Infernal Soul, even the total value of soul is weaker because you have weaker Drake stacks. And so this does quite a bit to make the game less bot lane focused, which is good because the game has been so much about dragon stacking. I think it's valuable that soul is good, is meaningful, is something worth playing for, because games should trend toward victory and should trend toward action, and there should be valuable objectives to play for that you can use and feel good about and feel good about succeeding and gaining and whatnot, right? Like that's good. But hey, this is going to make playing for bot lane less valuable, because as long as they don't get soul, like these things are like the extra value is 20 to 40% lower. Okay. But of course, not just happening to bot lane, it's happening to top lane as well. So Rift Herald, of course, is still worth a pile of experience. It's still worth some local gold. It is still worth about 2 turret plates when it charges. Well, it's worth 100 less local gold. It's also down here at turret plates, worth another roughly 100 less gold on turret plates. So instead of giving you 350 plus 200 is about 550, not kind of the turret itself falling. It's now about 350, right? 250 here plus the 100. So the gold value is going down pretty substantially. It's going down, 200? What I say, from 550 to 350, but also it's still worth half a turret, and that turret itself is worth 500. So, that other 250 hasn't really changed. Rift Herald is nerfed, I would argue, less than dragons are nerfed ultimately. Obviously soul makes up for it somewhat, but also like the actual turret dying is really valuable, and those are still full value. First turret gold, overall, like just pressure, right, value overall quite high. But yeah, right, one fewer thing to snowball with, where it's like, hey, if you get a kill and you get 400 gold, or for first blood, or 300 gold for your second kill, or whatever, yeah, you still get all the individual power, but Herald is always shared, Drakes are always shared, team snowballing is down, individual snowballing substantially less down. This is side sort of tangent here, but Baron Nashor just has more base health at 20 minutes. The health per minute scaling is unchanged here, but essentially says, look, we actually can track the average time of first Baron kill, and it's gone down over time. Some of this is, items have gotten stronger and people have gotten better at farming, and we've probably inflated the amount of gold in the game to a certain degree that we could probably walk back to some degree, right? But ultimately, the point is Baron is dying faster than it has been before. Unraveling all the various forms of gold income is really hard. Certainly some of it's going, when, hey, you have less, bonus AD from Infernal Drake, and you have, less bonus gold from Herald and whatnot. yeah, you know, we'll do a little less damage against Baron because one of you hasn't finished your legendary this time. But ultimately, Baron's dying too fast. Bring it back down. Next thing is adjustments to early death timers from level 2 onward. Then just trying to say that, look, if you get your kill, you still get it. You still get your benefit. You still get to feel good. Congratulations. Go for it. Go have fun. Go get your leads. But on the receiving end, you're going to be a little bit less nerfed. You're still gone for at least 6 seconds, plus all the time it takes you to walk back, or TP, to be fair. But you know, and we know that this will put a constraint on, like, hey, it's going to be a little bit harder to finish shoving in the wave and taking your recall. That's true, because your opponent's getting back to lane 2 or maybe 4 seconds faster if you first blood them, you know, before first components or whatever. They're getting back to lane 2 to 4 seconds faster, and this will make it a little bit harder for you to get your freeze or get your recall back. That's true. So the person who's killed is going to have a slightly easier time, maybe stopping your recall or catching the wave and not getting as far behind. I think this still just like helps the losing case more than it hurts the winning case. I think disproportionately this does that, and so I think it is a net positive for the game. There is a floor. We are not allowed to bring the death timers below. You need enough time that you can recuperate, you can check the shop, you can buy stuff, you can process what happened to you, and then get back out there. But that is the change. Okay, next thing was a set of rune adjustments. And I think this is the last sort of major set of changes. This is, again, aimed under the anti-snowballing umbrella. The initial goal, the initial direction was to take the runes that scale with gold and make them scale less with gold. Now, this does, you know, ultimately turn into individual snowballing, but it essentially says, look, if you're snowballing on Talon, Talon W is going to deal a lot of damage, not electrocute. You're not going to spike your electrocute by getting ahead in gold. You're going to spike your kit by being ahead in gold. And so any given champion is going to spike less off of getting a double kill, because generally speaking, champion combat gives much more gold than experience. And if you're losing your lane really, really hard, you're gaining full XP if you don't die, even if you have to drop CS or drop plates or whatever, right? Snowballing gives you gold, not XP. Losing gives you XP, not gold. And so the more that runes can be based on level and not gold, based on XP and not gold, then runes can be a soft anti-snowballing measure by locking most of their power behind performance agnostic progression, right? Now, what ended up happening was the first passive numbers ended up being nerfs to a lot of these runes. And public perception was like, Riot's lowering damage, let's go. Awesome change, Riot, I love it. And it's like, okay, you know what? That wasn't the initial goal. Because the initial goal was to keep them power neutral and say, if you're ahead on gold, it's going to be a little bit weaker, but if you're behind on gold, it's going to be a little better, and electric is going to be like roughly the same power across game time. But you know what? The community's really gung-ho about this being a damage reduction. You know what? Let's do it. Like, these changes are already in. Let's make sure we do the rest of the changes that make sense. Like, let's you know, retain some level of relative parity. This is why we had, like, this was another one where we had the memes around, like, oh, of course they didn't nerf lethal tempo. Phreak's an 80 carry main. And it's like, well, no. One, I didn't do these changes. I didn't suggest a single bit of numbers until the very end where we wanted to do fine numbers tuning. This was never my project. It was never my project. And also, anyway, so people like to place blame on things. They are often wrong. Please don't stand for that, right? Like, have your well-reasoned conversations. Don't jump to conclusions. Let's try, right? Anyway, let's talk about these changes, right? So ultimately, what it comes down to is we're nerfing most keystones by about 10%. So Conqueror is losing about 10%. Lethal Tempo is losing about 10%. Electrocute is getting shifted. Lower ratios, more base damage. Same to Dark Harvest, same to Comet, same to Airy, same to Fleet. First Strike getting nerfed by a flat 11% to be fair. Taste of Blood's being shifted. Again, more base, less ratio. And Press the Attack, same proc damage, less percent damage amp. Okay, let's do the numbers themselves because reading them by each time doesn't really matter. Okay. So here is full stacks of Conqueror, how much ability power or attack damage the rune gives. You can see this rune is about 10% weaker. Now, to be fair, only the damage of Conqueror is down 10%. The healing hasn't changed, so Conqueror arguably still got away with less of a nerf than the other runes did. If we have to follow up and further nerf Conqueror, we can. We're happy to do so. We will if we need to. But regardless, right now, Conqueror is arguably a little bit less nerfed than the other runes, although stay tuned because some runes are actually less nerfed than this. Okay, next up is Lethal Tempo for melee or ranged users, and you can see it is nerfed, again, about 10%. Great. And these stat runes, right, like these stat runes functionally multiply the rest of your kit, right? Attack damage multiplies things like ability haste, that multiply things like lethality or any kind of percent pen or whatever. So it does kind of, have a multiplying effect, even if it is just kind of simple base stats. Lethal Tempo aggressively as well, right? Lethal Tempo multiplies bonus city, multiplies crit chance, multiplies everything else. Lord Dominus regards everything else. So it is a pretty hard multiplier here, but it's something like, Electrocute, where you can't really multiply that hard by many useful ways. Okay, let's talk about Electrocute. So Electrocute, at level 1, gets hit pretty hard because with a Doran's Ring, Doran's Blade, stat shards, you can actually get quite a lot of stats at really early on in the game. But realistically, what you're looking at here is, maybe first recall onwards. It's, up through about here, where most games end, it's down, 8 to 15% for AP users. So for AP mages, they're losing, again, 10 to 15% of the value of Electrocute. And look, at level 18, if you have 500 AP, you're approaching full build, or it's 4 items with death cap around there. It can be up to 20% weaker. In the really extreme cases like Vhagar, it can be more than that, of course, if you have like 1,000 ability power. But this is kind of the direction here. If you're an AD champion, again, the level 1 value is pretty rough, but also level 1 Electrocute doesn't really exist. But the per-level scaling takes off, and you can see, actually, for the vast majority of the game, AD Electrocute only lost 4 to 10%. So compared to Conqueror, compared to First Strike, AD Electrocute lost less. I saw the Zed flares in Reddit being like, rip Electrocute. Electrocute is the least nerfed rune for Zed. The least nerfed rune for Zed. First Strike is down 11%. Period. All outputs. Conquer is down 10% on all the damage outputs. And, there's not a lot of... there are some Conquer talents out there, but, like... AD champions... Electrocute is the least nerfed rune. Math. Next is Dark Harvest. Now, of course, this is not counting gains per stack. It's the total number difference between doesn't really change. So gains per stack, again, we see that Dark Harvest, again, a bit weaker early on, but we see how much damage it comes through here. And, it's down, 10 to 15% for AP champions. Now, if you're someone like Brand, who's getting, lower amounts of ability power compared to his levels, just because, right, you don't farm the lane nearly as hard. You have a cap on how much gold you can earn. You even have an item slot locked in for control wards, an item slot locked in for your support item, which is going to be less AP than any other item you could buy. Hey, it's going to be even less nerf for someone like him, and so supports actually gain a little bit in this regard. But, the Dark Harvest for an AD user, right? If you're Talon, if you're Zed, if you're Qiyana, if you're Kha'Zix, again, less nerfed than First Strike, less nerfed than Conqueror, less nerfed than a lot of other options here. This rune looks quite a bit nicer by comparison. Now, certainly it is damage down. It is absolutely damage down. And if you were already running Phase Rush, or you were already running, Guardian or Aftershock or Spellbook, those didn't get nerfed, right? Like, the relative value of those runes did go up, but, like, no one's going to play Guardian Talon. So in terms of damage runes, what are you going for? Probably something like this. Okay, how about for Comet? Again, Comet for AP, we can see the numbers, and it's down about 8 to 15%. It's about a 10% damage nerf for AP rune users. Of course, keep in mind, Phase Rush is untouched. I actually expect we're going to see a pretty big spike in Phase Rush users. Okay, that'll happen. We'll measure that. We'll see what happens. But Comet for AD users, down, much more like 5 to 10%. Now, this one's still a more sizable nerf. I think, Comet didn't come out like a winner by any means, but Comet, again, less nerfed than Conqueror, less nerfed than First Strike. We go to Airy. Airy for AP users, down a little bit softer. This is down, around like 7 to 15%, but like, softer for a lot longer here, right? 10 to 5% for a lot of the mid game here. But for AD users, actually, maybe a buff. We might see, the Jace types maybe want to try Airy. You can see the sort of damage. You compare, Comet 32 to 1, like 30 to 160. 12 to 77. So, it's like about half value as Comet. So, how frequently are you hitting this? But yeah, AD Airy is looking pretty decent. And I actually went and looked at Aerie users on live right now. The most frequent AD Aerie user is Nasus. Let's be clear, that's clearly AP Nasus. Next place is like Senna at like 5% pick rate. Aerie just like doesn't exist on AD champions. So the fact that it's actually buffed for AD is probably a good thing because it doesn't have any users. Probably should be allowed to have some users. So even though people, weren't aware at first brush, yeah, actually things like Electrocute and Aerie and whatnot are actually relatively stronger compared to First Strike and Conqueror. Aerie, again, being an actual winner here, it's literally gaining damage. Here's the Aerie shield ratio, actually down pretty substantially. This will do quite a lot, honestly, for shielding enchanters. Now, I believe, let me double check actually. Yeah, I still chose high levels of AP here. I believe I have one for, actually, do I not? Oh, I didn't have one. Oh, wait, I'm actually kind of trolling. Hang on. Let's go ahead and change this to a more support look here. Let's do something like 19 plus, I think it's, what, 170, something around here. So let's actually take a more reasonable approach. And this is like, hey, so Aerie for enchanters. Yeah, not really any worse, right? This is Aerie for damage dealers. I believe, right? This is a high amount of ability power. So Aerie for mages is this, but Aerie shielding for mages, or like, moderate AP users, like what is your example Milio build? And it's like, oh, it's kind of the same rune, honestly. It's not really any different. AD, again, like AD shield is a little bit fake. I mean, to be fair, Senna is like the only one here, and she probably has actually about this much bonus AD via souls, so it's not that fake, but this does hurt Senna shielding with Aerie, but I mean, her damage with Aerie is actually better, so can you really complain? But regardless, yeah, those are the changes. Look at Fleet Footwork. Fleet Footwork, yeah, pretty hurt here. Hurt for mages, again, not terribly hurt for AD champions, right? Again, down, something more like, 5-10% for most of the game. Level 1 and 2, notwithstanding, whatever. You're often full health at level 1 when using Fleet anyway, doesn't really care. But yeah, guess what? So your desire to go Fleet Footwork over Lethal Tempo or press the attack, stay tuned, as an AD carry, goes up. You are much more likely to pick the defensive option. Taste of Blood gets to be much more neutral. Again, goal wasn't to nerf this one. It's a minor rune. It's got pretty healthy competition. But overall, the amount you're going to heal is going to scale less with gold and scale more with just basic champion level. So Taste of Blood, relatively flat, not very different from before. Using example AD ratio pickups, again, this kind of world, nothing too spicy here. Next thing, though, is press the attack. So the damage on proc did not change, but the damage amp did go down. The damage amp, both amps damage you deal and your teammates deal. This, of course, ends up being a gold multiplier. The big thing to point out is that usually, from what I've spot checked in my own games, you get... By the end of the game, you do a relatively similar amount of damage from the amp as you do from the pop itself. And so, hey, the amp being 20% less good is about a 10% damage decrease. No big surprises there. So not much else to say about this except that those are the changes. That's the math. Some ARM changes. Okay, so we are 2 hours and 50 minutes in. Let's go ahead and go for a TLDR on patch 13.20. I'll do the best I can on this one. Lots of champion changes. A little bit less move speed and early damage on Akshan. Not much to talk about. Pretty small change here. Bel'Veth is getting reshaped towards caring about crit and having better on-hit damage. Essentially, this moves her away from Stridebreaker builds and back toward Kraken Slayer builds. She has much less attack speed, much less damage reduction, but will deal substantially more damage during Royal Maelstrom in any conventional damage build. Galio gets a lower cooldown on ranks up of W and a lower cooldown on the passive shield at level 6 and 11, so Galio can be a bit tankier and have more CC. Jinx gets some health growth, gets her passive attack speed can stack, which is really cool, and a bit more damage and cooldown reduction on her R. Small changes here. Kazani gets a very, very, very large update. The big things to point out here is that he is much less bursty. Okay, the big thing to point out here are that W now has a minimum channel time of 0.65 seconds, but does more crowd control and much, much, much more damage, while also blocking much more damage. So it is a much stronger ability, but it has now a minimum required channel. All Out Pathmaker actually has less burst damage overall. Also still a required channel, though smaller than the base form, but a lower cooldown instead of increasing the overall base damage of the ability. All Out itself is going to more reliably give bonus attack damage and healing and attack speed, but it's overall going to deal less burst damage itself. The goal here is to buff Cassante overall, to not make him quite as much of a combo, like sort of burst assassin, open up room for counterplay, but make his abilities themselves stronger. That's the goal. will tune as needed. Kaisa gets -3 armor. Milio can now apply Oblivion Orb through his passive, even if it's on an ally, though it still will not steal kills. Warm Hugs gets a better cooldown and better shielding. Aug gets a better AP ratio, so he has better defensive outputs and better supportive outputs. Morgana gets an AP ratio buff and a monster damage buff on W to make her a better mid laner and a better jungler. She gets a small support nerf on rank 1 Black Shield, and Soul Shackles gets more move speed, more stun, and more damage. Quinn loses some base health and base move speed to put her in line with other ranged top laners with disengage tools. Gets a little bit of attack damage growth as compensation to make her less of an extreme lane bully, and it will end up making her a bit more about the mid-game roaming as sort of what her strength has to entail, because she's going to be less good at surviving when a melee jumps onto her. Zed gets a late-game cooldown increase on Living Shadow, 0 to 3 seconds. Ziggs gets an explosion hitbox increase, so that this is the when it decides to explode, not the radius explosion itself, so you're more likely to hit someone who's running around. Blading Jewel gets to be less of a bad component. Void Staff is unchanged. Duskblade of Brakthar gets -5 ability haste and about 1% less damage amp overall. This item is a bit overpowered, is over-poached, and we're trying to get it off of most of the non-assassins. Meanwhile, assassins themselves, don't worry, a buff Yumi's Ghostblade, which gives 4 to 6 extra lethality while you have shards. Lord Darm's Regards had a bug where it was not giving a damage amp, or so it was not giving you the damage amp if your target was shielded, and it was not giving you the damage amp before lifesteal, so you were never lifestealing the fully amplified damage. That has been fixed because that is power positive. The overall damage amp is going down a bit. There's a big set of changes to junglers. Smite deals much less damage in PvP. You can now target close to an epic monster without hovering directly over it and still land your smite on that monster. This is that, like someone like a Cho'Gath or a Nunu or a Tibbers or a Daisy can't block your smite. You can target around the dragon or baron and still smite it. A bunch of jungle-specific rules. Junglers no longer take less damage from epic monsters with teammates nearby. Blue Smite gives less move speed. Green Smite no longer gives tenacity and slow resist. And Red Smite is no longer triggered by Smite itself. You can now Smite for the slow and then deal a follow-up auto-attack or spell so that you can use your Scorch Claw burn and not overlap the slows. That is meant to be actually agency and power up for Scorch Claw junglers. Monster camps have more health. What this means is your first clear is almost entirely unchanged. Your second clear onwards will have 3 to 4% more health in the sort of full total jungle. And then late game camps will have like 10 to 20% more health than they currently do on live. Rift Scuttler will have much more health than it does on live. With his rewards pushed much more to late game, it is still the most valuable camp on the map, and it's not close. Small XP increase to medium and small Krugs to make Krugs slightly more worth clearing. These just didn't get caught in a recent XP sweep, so it's a very light XP increase to the Krug camp. Monsters are going to do less damage to you after the first clear. However, your healing on monster kill is going down. The amount of damage per second your jungle companion deals is going to have a lower AD ratio, but a higher armor and MR ratio to allow tanks to have closer clear speeds to AD champions. But there is now a fairly generous heal per second cap from the companion. You will not run into this unless you are playing a late game tank or are Rammus. Non-junglers will do about 20% less damage to jungle camps than they currently do, which means they're less likely to be poached. That means your camps are more likely to be up for you, the jungler. It is less likely that your teammates will poach your camps and that your opponents will counter jungle you. But as that is happening, we are putting in a rule or changing the rule where it's going to be less likely that you as a jungler will want to poach the lanes themselves. This maths out to be about, you get 7% less XP from lane minions across the first 20 minutes of the game compared to the current live version of this change. So it is small, it is fairly subtle, but you will get 7% less lane minion XP than you currently do right now in the game. There's also a bug fix where you could actually lock yourself into the penalty for the rest of the game. That has been fixed. You will not lock yourself in the penalty anymore. Not only are junglers having a slightly lower health clear and getting some late game power adjustments, but also starting items have been buffed to the tune of about 2 AD and 20 health, or something very similar to that for the rest of all of these items. All the Dorans plus all the support starter items. The basic point here is that, hey, it is very likely that laners will now no longer go like Sapphire plus potions and take the early last chapter recall. It's much less likely that AD carriers will go longsword 3 potions. It's much more likely that everyone will go for Adorans. They will have more stats when the jungler comes to gank them, to the tune of like 100 health, which is a very big deal. It's going to make the game less snowballing and going to make them less gankable. Water Walking is getting less move speed, but much more stats in the early game. This is basically a free long sword if you're going for the standard level 4 Scuttle Clear. That is certainly still a meaningful amount of power here to Water Walking, but it's going to be less about mobility. Bunch of changes to Snowballing overall. The value of each Drake stat, except for Chem Drake, is down 20 to 40%. The value of each soul is up about 10%, which probably does not compensate for this entirely, but we still do want soul to be valuable. The total value of Rift Herald in terms of like all of what you were gaining in terms of the gold and XP earned and the turret plate gold you're taking is probably also down around 25%. So that is an objective that is also going down to some degree. Baron Nashor is getting some more base health, so it's not going to be cleared quite as quickly. Death times between levels 2 and 9 are getting 2 to 4 seconds faster, or more like 2 to 6 seconds faster, based on the breakpoint here, so that if you are killed early on, you can get back to your lane and catch your XP and catch your waves a little bit more likely and get sent into the Shadow Realm less strongly. Individual snowballing from turret plates going down. Also a bunch of rune changes, TLDR, Conqueror, and Lethal Tempo, as well as First Strike, are all down just like flatly about 10%. For the rest of these runes, they are down about 5% for most of the game for AD champs, and about 10 to 11% for most of the game for AP champions, which means more AD champs will get off of Conqueror and off of First Strike and back onto things like Airy, which is actually buffed for some AD champions, but towards Comet, towards Harvest, towards Electrocute. For AP champs, they'll probably move towards Phase Rush, which is not getting nerfed this patch. But overall, it does mean there is a pretty substantial damage decrease from this patch via a bunch of changes to Keystones. Fleet Footwork, again, nerfed less than something like Conqueror or First Strike was, or the Tempo, so some AD carries should probably see themselves moving toward Fleet Footwork as a result of these changes here as well. Taste of Blood, relatively flat. Ares Shielding, relatively flat. Just kind of to point out some numbers overall. That's the patch. Thanks for watching. 2.5 hours. I did better than I thought I would. See you, everyone.